Well, I hope everyone had a great Christmas and a very happy New Year, because today's episode, we're back in the studio, all of us, and we're going to make some predictions. That's right. Will 2024 be the year of the zombie apocalypse we've all been anticipating? Or will it be the year that we just turn everything around and it all goes back to roses and puppy dogs and lollipops? We're going to be answering all of those questions. We're going to be going through, we're going to be looking at politics. We're going to be looking at personal improvement. We're going to be looking at war across the globe. And we're going to be making predictions on just about everything that you will be able to hold us to account for in the months to come. And I got to tell you, I'm excited about 2024.
Absolutely.
Probably for all the wrong reasons, but I am excited about 2024 because I think it's going to be one for the history books. And I'm just excited where we're at with all of it. So we're going to be answering all of that and more. Plus, we are going to give you, despite the fact that none of us are financial experts, we're going to give you the number one spot you can go for all the best stock picks for all of 2024. That's right. We can't legally give that advice, but we're going to do it because we know, stick around and you'll learn more. It's just following whatever Nancy Pelosi's husband invests in. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument.
I was about to say, that was a twist I wasn't ready for. But anyway, we have so many good plans for 2024 coming up, and we are excited for you to join us on this journey. If you haven't already, go down to the link in the description. Join our community chat. We would love to get to know you there. A lot of exciting things coming up.
All right. As always, I am your host, Nick Freitas, member of the Virginia House of Delegates. But other than that, a relatively decent guy, kind of, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. With us in the studio is my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our producer of producers, Nicholas Hamilton, the good Hamilton, the one that doesn't like central banking.
You're going to me first today.
Yeah, I had to do that because if I go to Christian, I know what's going to happen. We're going to get locked up in some sort of dialogue that leaves you out of the introduction process, and I didn't want to do that. But
Thank you, Nick. Last
but certainly not least, Master Hines. That's right, our political prognosticator and resident historian. How are you, buddy?
Happy New Year. I'm so happy to get out of 2023.
You sound happy.
It's like, yeah.
This is Christian's voice when he is filled with glee.
Christian didn't leave 2023 as much as he escaped it, right?
Yeah.
All right.
It's good to be back, though.
No. Look, let's first things first. Let's talk about a couple things that are going to be happening over the next few months, because I do have to go down to Richmond for the legislative session, which is going to start the second Wednesday in January, and it goes all the way through mid-March. So we're not going to be able to do the regularly scheduled live episodes that we've been doing every Tuesday and Thursday. However, in anticipation and knowing that this was going to take place, we actually pre-recorded a lot of stuff. We've done a lot of interviews. We got a great interview coming up with John Lovell, but this time we made it even better because we brought on his wife, Becca, and I brought in my wife, Tina, and we sat down and we had a conversation about all sorts of things, from military life to raising kids to their time in the mission field. Really, really good conversation there. We've also talked to Jessica Tapia, who is the teacher that got fired out of a California school district for refusing to lie to parents, because that's apparently a fireable offense in California unified school districts now. So we got her coming on. We've got a ton of other people that we've interviewed. Matt Boudreau is another one. If you're familiar with Tim Kennedy and Matt Boudreau worked together. Matt Boudreau was a professional educator for many years, and essentially through that experience decided, I'm not sending my kids to this. And he got out, started developing his own educational mechanism. It's really interesting, very interesting stuff, and very encouraging for anybody that's been thinking to themselves, all right, look, I'm fed up with the way that the government's running education. I want an alternative. So Matt Boudreau provides some insight on how to do that.
It's fascinating.
Some of the mechanisms. It's really, really good stuff. So again, we have a ton of interviews that are coming up. And then obviously we're going to be shooting other episodes and doing things like that. And we're going to be trying to keep in that Tuesday and Thursday, but it's just the live part that we're not going to be able to do as regularly scheduled. However, if you join our community chat over in Circle, links in the description. We got over 1,000 members down there now. We're going to be leaning very, very heavily into our community for developing what the podcast looks, especially coming out of March and going into the rest of 2024. So if you want to be a part of that, that is a great place to join up, provide some insight. We're really going to be we're just going to be doubling down on the amount of effort that we put into that community, because we're going to build a lot of stuff out of there, and we're pretty excited about what comes up. We're going to have some more updates as we go forward. So
just to clarify, we're also going to be doing team episodes just like we have here that are pre-recorded. So we're going to be mixing interviews and team episodes in together. If you'd like to be up to date on what episodes are coming out when, join our community chat, and you'll be in the know.
Plus, at the end of today's episode, the last 30 minutes of today's episode, we're going to be dedicating it exclusively to your questions. So if there's anything we're talking about right now, if we're like, Nick, that was an excellent prediction on whatever it was you predicted, but you didn't answer my question on the thing we really wanted a prediction on. Well, that last 30 minutes, we're gonna do that. And of course, all of this is brought to you by the good people over at Good Ranchers. Stick around because I don't know, we might have a funny segue into our Good Ranchers ad. Maybe we will, maybe we don't. I'm not making any promises. We'll see what. I'm just kidding. We made promises to Good Ranchers. We'll definitely do an ad. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our first predictive question that we have, right? And so the way this is going to work is we're going to take turns, maybe like reading off questions and demanding someone answer it. All right. So my first question for Christian will be, will Trump be convicted and will it prevent him from being able to seek the Republican nomination?
No. And well, certainly no to the second question.
So either way, convicted, not convicted.
I actually don't know if he'll be convicted or not, but I know that that's not going to stop him from. He's going to get the nomination. I mean, this is the most boring primary ever.
Bunch of people running for second place.
Yeah, and I like what a lot of these. I mean, as long as you're not Nikki Haley or Chris Christie, I like what you have to say if you're probably up there on the stage. And so, like, we've got some interesting people running. Like, I've praised a lot of Ron DeSantis' record in Florida before. Yeah. I like a lot of what Vivek has to say.
Yeah.
But neither of them are going to win. Like, Trump's going to get the nomination.
I really thought DeSantis crushed Gavin Newsom in that little debate they had. There was only one line that Newsom had that I was like, all right, that's pretty funny. And that's when Gavin Newsom said, you and I do have one thing in common. Neither of us will be the nominee for our party for president this, 2024.
I still wouldn't, I would say the jury's actually still out for Newsom.
Oh, well, that's not the question, though.
That's not the question.
Stick to Trump, because I think that question's coming.
To answer the question, Donald Trump is going to get the nomination unless something like catastrophic.
So you don't think he'll be convicted of anything?
No, it's not that I don't think he'll be convicted. It's that I think regardless of whether or not he will be convicted, he's going to get the nomination.
Well, I see, because I think there was only one.
Depends on what he's convicted of and if it stands. If he is convicted of an insurrection, then
he'll go up in the polls.
I understand, but then there will be actually constitutional justification for keeping him off ballot.
Well, here's what I'll say. I think that out of all the charges I've seen leveled against Trump and looked at, and again, I don't claim to be a lawyer. A lot of it just seems, a lot of the stuff in New York is just absolute garbage. Like, oh, he overvalued his real estate. Like, oh, shut up.
It's all BS. BS.
There's one thing against Trump. And again, part of this is Trump's inability to shut up at times. And that has to do with some of the conversations that went down with respect to the classified materials at Mar-a-Lago. There's some of the things that he said in there that, look, you might be able to get a conviction off of that. Not because he did, listen, let's be honest here. Not because he did anything that was some sort of major threat to national security. And this is also the problem where the Democrats created a situation for themselves, because there is, from what I've seen so far, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing Trump did with respect to the classified documents that left the White House that was anywhere near as bad as what Hillary Clinton did. But with Hillary Clinton, it was like, well, there was no intent to do anything nefarious, so we decided not to charge you. Like, oh, I didn't realize that was the law now.
Well,
but
the president has the ability to declassify documents, right? And so because the president can do that, and Hillary Clinton did not have the authority to do that, what they basically were splitting hairs, but still.
And that is going to be the argument. The problem is some of the comments that he made that people are now testifying to, which suggests that he knew he hadn't declassified those documents.
Okay, so I maintain this opinion, and I could totally be wrong, but the only conviction basically that's going to mean anything with getting on ballots in states is the insurrection one.
Yeah, I'm more worried about that.
None of the others, all of the others are, shoot, he'll still be on the ballot, and even if he did something illegal, even if he goes to jail, he'll still be on the ballot unless it's insurrection, because they're all pointing to this.
The 14th Amendment.
Right.
Yes. Well, and I would say I think the insurrection charges are absolute garbage. Like if they
BS,
if they
total
convict
BS.
him on that, if they can convict him on that.
Civil War.
We actually did a podcast on that. I don't think
it'll
it
get
would.
bad.
Yeah.
I don't think it would quite, because we did a podcast on that, right? That removing Trump for the ballot or disqualifying him or throwing him in prison would that trigger a civil war? And I don't think that it necessarily would. I think it would radicalize a lot of people even more than they already are. In fact, actually, I think the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot right now.
Oh my gosh,
by
Colorado
doing
and Maine.
this. Like they. I tweeted about this a few days ago. Like. If they genuinely think that this is going to somehow fix the problem from their point of view, they're more delusional than I ever thought that they were, because throwing Trump in prison or convicting him of any of these charges, some of which are absolutely bogus. In fact, most of them, if not all of them, are absolutely bogus. Like, doing all this is not going to deal with the circumstances that led to a figure like Trump emerging in the first place.
Oh, no, opposite.
In fact, it's going to amplify those circumstances. So it might not be Trump that comes along and actually sweeps, clean, drains the swamp, so to speak, but it'll be somebody in that same mold down the road that will be doing that.
My opinion is Trump will be on the ballots. He will be the nominee, and he will beat whoever he's up against.
Well, you're just jumping ahead on questions.
Hey, I'm just saying. Well, and my whole opinion on this is he's only got one term, so he has nothing to lose, and so I think he has tons of leeway to do whatever he wants. Well, he's not going to be worried about a re-election at that point.
I think when it comes down to
that's actually something I find a little bit attractive about this option. So
I think he might get convicted of something, and I think it'll be relatively trivial in the end. I don't think if he gets convicted of the insurrection, I don't think it sticks. And I think Colorado and Maine are shooting themselves in the foot. All right,
5 minutes.
That was our 5 minutes on that one. Now we were trying to keep
else
ourselves.
Hear the beeping, or is that just us?
I'll turn that off.
We're trying to keep ourselves to a time right now because we're so bad about rabbit trails. But I think we did pretty good on that one.
Yeah.
Next question.
Next question. All right. So who will be actually I'm gonna change this up. Who will be the Democratic nominee? And let's also assume who would be the Democratic nominee if it isn't Biden. All right. So the first question is, will Biden be the nominee? Tina, do you think Biden will be the nominee?
No.
You don't think it'll be okay, Christian? Do you think Biden?
Yes.
Hamilton.
Yes.
I think Biden's going to be the nominee, but since Tina led off with no, he's going to die from falling downstairs before he could.
No, that's not.
So who
my
is going to be the Democratic nominee?
Well, I don't think that anybody who has announced so far for the Democratic.
She's going the Michelle route.
No. I think Newsom. I think it'll be Newsom. Him playing off this whole neither of us will be the nominee for our party, blah, blah, blah. That was as much of a zinger as that might have been on that stage. That was also another lie that he told up there. I am telling you, I think he is definitely planning to be the nominee. And even if he wins, even if Biden wins the nomination, there is a lot of time between the nomination and the general for a switch. And I do not put it past him to there are too many Democrats that are pointing out the cognitive decline of the president and the incompetency of him and the vice president.
So you think it will be Newsom? By the time we get to election day, it's Newsom on the ballot for the Democrats.
I think it would be Newsom. Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's Biden, but I do think Newsom has definitely positioned himself to be the alternative if something happens. And I do think he's auditioning to run for president, which honestly on some level, I'm like, oh, please run Newsom.
Why else would he be trying to make such a splash on the national stage? And it's crazy to me that he is running California directly into the ground and yet trying to court people on the national stage.
Here's the funny part. When he was mayor of San Francisco, he said, we have put forward a bold plan to effectively end homelessness in San Francisco. And he did such a good job that they promoted him to governor. Oh, wait, no, he didn't do a good job in San Francisco. They just promoted him to governor because just like saying the right things in the San Francisco mayoral race gets you elected to mayor, saying the right things in the gubernatorial race gets you elected to governor of California. You don't have to actually show any definitive results with respect to what you promise people. And I'm looking at this going, holy crap, this guy screwed up San Francisco. He screwed up California. And now we're thinking, gosh, I wonder what he could do with 50 states.
Well, I don't know. He did finally clean it up for, Xi Jinping. China to come and wave a bunch of Chinese flags up and down where human fecal matter used to be.
That is the quickest way to clean up streets in San Francisco, is to invite a communist dictator for a trade conference.
Yeah, and so basically, if we were to put that on a bigger scale, then okay, well maybe he'll do a bunch of stuff for the communist dictators if he's president.
Okay, let me. Okay, so we all think it's going to be Biden. I think Newsom is obviously. Would you agree with that, Newsom?
If Biden isn't on, I mean, because I think Biden will be the nominee now.
Yeah.
Now, if he makes it to November, either for health reasons or for cognitive reasons, or just because the Democratic machine realizes that they can't win with him for whatever reason, if they decide to go with a switch, I mean, it depends on the timing, right? Because if you're talking like post convention, you're starting to run out of time. And so at that point, you need somebody that can really excite the base. You're basically throwing a Hail Mary. If you're talking about before the convention, right? If something happens tomorrow and Joe Biden's not running and he's dropped out of the race, or God forbid he passes away, I'm not gonna necessarily, be joyful over, just because my political opponents are dead, right? I'm not gonna stoop to that level. But if he's either incapacitated, dead, or decides to drop out, whatever it is, before the convention, then you have a little bit more leeway, right? You have more time to like go through the traditional primary process. So I would say that if it's before convention, it's probably somebody like Newsom. Mm-hmm. And if it's after convention, you have to go for a wild card like somebody like Michelle Obama or somebody like that.
Well, I don't know about that, because if you look at why else would Newsom be trying to constantly be on the national stage?
Because he's auditioning for next time.
Okay, I think he is positioning himself to be the logical next person to pick. And that's why he's doing presidential style debate with Republicans. And it's also why he's going around and,
I don't disagree with your reason.
glad-handing people in other states.
It is possible to do both at the same time.
Yeah,
right.
I
But what I'm saying is, I think he is positioning himself to be on the national stage in case this happens. That he would be the logical step.
I don't disagree with that. I think, like I said, I think he's positioning to be the alternative to Biden if for some reason Biden can't run. I think Christian's point, and this actually makes a lot of sense, is once you get into like a potentially contested convention where now all of a sudden it's like, who do we pick? You're generally going at a convention for like what do you call it? The not the consolidation candidate, but the candidate that can kind of unify everyone. The consensus candidate. And I'm telling you right now, if Michelle Obama decided to jump in and be the consensus candidate, I don't think Gavin Newsom tries to challenge her for that. I don't. All right. Well, that's our 5 minutes for that one. All right.
Yep.
Moving on to the next one. Okay. Here we go. Now, regardless of who wins the election, whether it's Biden, Trump, Newsom, Michelle Obama, I don't know, somebody we haven't heard of yet, whoever wins, will there be violent riots?
Absolutely.
So no matter who wins, we're seeing violent riots.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. Pretty much everybody on the right side of the aisle is probably assuming that if Trump is the nominee and Trump loses again, that it was stolen. No matter what, we're already set up to believe it's going to be stolen.
Yeah.
They're already setting themselves up to make us feel like they're trying to steal it by keeping him off ballots and things like that. And I mean, the left does all these crazy shenanigans with elections, and we all know it. And so no matter what, even if Trump were to legitimately lose, it's not going to be by very much, and people are going to think it was stolen. And we're going to probably be able to point to a lot of shenanigans going on to substantiate that claim, just like last time. And then here's the other thing is, if the Democrats win, obviously they can't say it was stolen. Or sorry, if Trump wins, obviously the Democrats can't say it's stolen. But I do think there will be absolute chaos. Well, I mean, remember the girl, whatever it was, screaming bloody murder in the middle of the street that became basically a GIF for everybody to use after that, the screaming. These people have not gotten better since then.
Well, Tina,
they've gotten even more deranged since then. I mean, they were throwing bricks through windows, setting things on fire, and that was not an insurgency, by the way, you guys. They were attacking private businesses and not the government that they were mad at, because it's definitely the business's fault. So anyway, I think you're going to see that just supersized.
Okay. So, well, I mean, this is kind of two different questions, because one of the things that you brought up there was an interesting point that I brought up with a reporter once, because when January 6th took place, I came out and I said, yeah, you shouldn't storm the Capitol to try to affect a change with respect to the Electoral College, and you certainly shouldn't engage in vandalism and things like that. I said, but not everybody that was in D.C. on January 6th was doing those things.
The overwhelming majority actually were.
Yeah, overwhelming majority were not. And quite frankly, I think we've been lied to about a lot of the things that took place within January 6th and the video footage, which suggests that's true.
Oh, and they call it the deadly
Not to mention the fact that many of those people have now been in jail for like a long time, like since that day almost. So it's not as if the government wasn't quick to go out and punish those people. Here's my question. And this, so I brought all this up with this reporter and I said, well, okay, but what do you say about all the riots and burning down buildings and CHOP and Chaz and everything else that was going on where they set up autonomous zones? She goes, and she looks at me, she goes, well, Nick, but this was the Capitol. I said, yeah, that's part of the problem here, is that you guys see the big white government building in Washington, D.C. as the overall symbol of our country. And I get that. But we also see all of the little small businesses and the people that have worked in their entire dang lives to try to build something to protect them. We see that as America too.
Yep.
Well, no, Nick, this is different. Like, yeah, you're right. One was a government building that immediately got National Guard police protection and high walls surrounding all of it in order to keep politicians safe. And the others was, well, this is just the summer of love, and I guess people just needed to be heard. And that's what insurance is for. So, yeah, you're right. We have two very, very different views of what actually constitutes America. And when you put all the emphasis, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any emphasis on it. Yes, I believe the Capitol building stands as an example or as a component of America. But if all the private citizens going out there living their lives and trying to build something, if that doesn't count, or we're going to diminish that importance, well then, yeah, I'm going to say that you and I have very, very different views on where America is found in this country. Yeah. So here's what I'll say is that I do think that, to your point, I don't, and again, let me caveat this. I don't want to see violent riots regardless of who wins, but I will say this. I think there's a huge problem with all the mud democracy people over on the left screaming about, because again, after all, that young lady was just screaming when Trump won because she was so concerned about democracy, and is no doubt now cheering the Supreme Court of Colorado and the Secretary of State of Maine, who is arbitrarily removing the names of candidates from ballots because insurrection. Oh, really? Can someone show me where Trump has even been charged with insurrection?
Well, he was in Georgia, wasn't he?
No, even that was a little bit different, right?
That was the whole
seditious conspiracy.
Yeah, okay.
But here's the deal: two people talking to plot to like disobey the law can technically fall under the realm of seditious conspiracy, right? There's a reason why they picked it, and it's because it's so dang broad on some levels that you can put a lot of stuff into it that most people don't think when they hear that.
And to your point, though, he hasn't been convicted of anything, and politicians, and that's what they are, right, are arbitrarily removing him from the ballot. That's the most explicit example of trying to rig an election that I've ever seen. Who knew that in a democracy you could simply remove your opponents from the ballot if they become too popular?
Well, in order to save democracy, we had to kill it.
I saw a guy on Twitter that was saying he doesn't need to be convicted in order to be kept off the ballot for insurrection. And I'm looking at that going, there has to be some kind of
here's the trick to that. The 14th Amendment says engage. And he's like, all you have to do is engage in it. And we know he engaged in it. I'm like, oh, okay, great. Well, then you've just engaged in treason. I don't got to prove it in a court of law or anything. I just have to declare that that's what happened.
Right.
I just have to declare that you've engaged it. The whole process, the whole due process of law thing there, big guy, fella, that's what we use to determine whether or not someone is actually engaged in a criminal activity. If you take that part out and just say, oh, well, it just means engage. Well, no, we have to actually go through a process to determine that you did legally do that. And if you're going to erase that process anytime you find it politically convenient, I got bad news. It's not going to work so well when people you don't like are in power and have decided you're the problem. Yeah. But as Christians pointed out several times as well, they don't think that far because they don't need to, because this is about the revolution, and it doesn't need to make sense as long as they win.
Well, when they changed the January 6th riots to January 6th insurrection. And here's the thing is now they add extra adjectives and extra words to it. So that now it's the deadly January 6th insurrection. And what's really interesting to me is the only person who was hurt or killed was somebody who basically was killed by a Capitol police officer.
Yeah, it was one of the
shooting through a door.
I think
and
I think
hitting
it
her.
was a door or a window.
It was
glass or
it was a
something
glass door, glass window on the door or whatever it was. And I'm telling you, the only other person who died that day was somebody in cardiac arrest that was a Capitol police officer, and that's supposed to be somehow caused by these insurrectionists.
I mean, look, I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole of
That's fine.
What
I'm just
caused
saying.
what. Well, look, we're out of time on this
look
one.
at the left and how they did their crazy, riots all throughout 2016?
2020.
No, 2016.
Okay, so a couple things here. We're in 2020 because we're supposed to move on. 2020, yes, they did riots during 2020. That was the whole summer of love thing and the whole deal. The other point that you're bringing out is that in 2016 when Trump got elected, two things happened. One, several legislators tried to stop the Electoral College from confirming the vote. Several Hollywood actors came out and said it was rigged. Jimmy Carter said it was rigged. Hillary Clinton said it was rigged. It was all rigged by the Russians. You had people throwing Molotov cocktails in Washington, D.C. at motorcades. You had people engaging in violent
Madonna
protests.
was saying she wanted to kill the president.
Right. Nobody accused any of that of insurrectionist behavior, right? Why? Because that term didn't work for what they wanted. It works now. And again, I'm not condoning the people who actually did go in, vandalize the Capitol, attempt to intimidate people. So I'm not condoning any of that. That's illegal. You deserve to be prosecuted for that if found guilty. I do think that a lot of the due process laws seem to have been subverted in this entire thing in service to a political narrative.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I guess the consensus here is that regardless of who wins the election, there's probably going to be riots of some kind.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let me again. I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm hoping there's a lot of things that can change between now and election night. But I will say this: a big part of the problem I have is that not only is this behavior toward Trump by the left with respect to, I think, trumped up charges with respect to trying to remove him from the ballot in Colorado and Maine, with respect to all of that is problematic. But then on top of that, a lot of the information that is now coming out about voting totals in Georgia, in Arizona, in Pennsylvania, and other places, that's also causing people to go back and say, wait a second, as more evidence comes out that not all of the claims that, hey, there was malfeasance with respect to the election was again just conspiracy theories. That's also going to fuel the fire that once again people are losing faith with respect to our voting process. Yeah. And one of the ways they solve this in Argentina, paper ballots. And I know we've had people ask us, why can't we go back to paper ballots in Virginia? It's very simple, because we don't have the votes to go back to paper ballots in Virginia. That's why. That's why it's not going to happen in Virginia. That's why it's not going to happen in most states. But it is something that people should push for, because the whole point with electronic ballots is this is easier and we're going to get the counts back faster. How's that worked out?
It takes us days to find out who won a state. Argentina found out in an afternoon or an evening who their president was. And thank God Milei won that election. Speaking of Argentina and its incredibly high inflation rate, I know that your next question is, will inflation go above 10% again? My answer is it never went down. No. Okay. So, we've done whole episodes, right, about, what the real inflation rate is and what the problem is with, debt monetization and fiat currencies and the Keynesian monetary system that we basically are practicing right now, or even quasi MMT style system that we're practicing right now. So I won't necessarily rehash all of that, but I will say the Federal Reserve is indicating that they might pivot next quarter, or I guess I should say this quarter, since it's January now. It's looking like in March that they're going to start cutting interest rates. And the fear that I have is that we will see a rehash of the 1970s. So there was, after Nixon took us off the gold standard, you had the Nixon shock, you had stagflation. And what happened was that you had a period of high inflation and high unemployment. So the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to deal with the inflation. It looked like inflation went away. So then the Federal Reserve cut interest rates to deal with the unemployment. And then inflation came back. And they went through this cycle something like 3 times before finally a guy named Volcker came into office that was appointed, ironically enough, actually, by Jimmy Carter was the guy that confirmed him.
Yeah.
And Paul Volcker's response to the inflation crisis of the 1970s as chair of the Federal Reserve was to raise interest rates so high that it could not possibly come back for a fourth or fifth time.
Yeah.
I mean, he raised interest rates to like 20%.
Yeah.
And that caused a lot of problems, but it finally put an end to the 1970s stagflation. It put an end to inflation. You haven't necessarily seen a repeat of that ever since, in part because it would be unbelievably expensive to repeat that. The United States was not nearly as much in debt at both the public or private sector as it was in the late 70s, early 80s. And so in the late 70s, early 80s, you could deal with 20% interest rates, at least temporarily. You couldn't even get close to that today. You would trigger a global depression if you triggered that today. So I think that the Fed is done raising interest rates because they think they've won the war on inflation, but I don't necessarily know if they have won the war on inflation. So I think they're going to cut interest rates, which might reinflate the everything bubble, which again, we've also talked about. But the real danger is that could bring back inflation. Now, the counter argument is that there might be a delay. And so you might not actually see a return to inflation this year. You might see it at the end of this year or beginning of next year.
Yeah.
And if that happens, that's actually a huge boost to Joe Biden's reelection efforts because you might see the tangible benefits of reinflating the everything bubble without the tangible downside of returning inflation.
I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think the Fed ultimately, look, there's always a lot of pressure because the powers that be, and this is both Republicans and Democrats. Can we just admit this real quick? If you were looking for bipartisan analysis of why both parties suck at something, inflation is the marquee example, because whether it's FDR or Richard Nixon or Barack Obama or Donald Trump, right? Like they've all been horrible on it. Alan Greenspan was horrible on it, and Alan Greenspan was supposed to be a big free market advocate. Paul Volcker was the only guy that actually had the guts to do what actually needed to be done to the extent that he could. So I think what's going to happen is I think it's largely political motivation for doing this. I think what you're going to see is one of the big issues right now is young people saying, how the heck do I buy a house? How the heck do I do all this other stuff? And so I think Biden is going to try to do it with a combination of forgiving student loans, which he can't do. He can only transfer the debt onto taxpayers, direct subsidies, probably some more tricks with respect to lending practices, because I sat in a meeting not long ago where that was recommended again. I said, didn't we try this in the early 2000s and didn't it lead to a massive housing bubble? And then they're going to lower interest rates, which is going to cause everybody that's been like pent up to buy a house right now that didn't want to buy it at a 7 or 8% interest rate is going to be like, oh my gosh, 4%, let's go get one. And that's going to cause housing prices to increase.
Because the housing prices really haven't come down that much. They're a little bit, but not much.
Well, the price of the house is going to go up, but the monthly payment is actually going to go down a little bit from the interest rate component.
But again, that's just going to...
It's just going to feel
that exactly is what I was talking about. That will reinflate the everything bubble. It will send asset prices higher. Yeah. Now, if you have a recession... right? Because we could have a recession. And so the Fed could be trying to get ahead of the ball and cutting interest rates in anticipation of a recession. Yeah. The argument is, they're cutting interest rates because they think they want inflation. Or some people are saying, no, they're cutting interest rates because they're trying to head off a recession that's coming. Those two circumstances would lead to wildly different results. If they think they want inflation, you could cut interest rates and you'll just reinflate the everything bubble and the inflation might be delayed. If they're trying to head off a recession, well, then that goes back to your previous questions. I mean, that could massively hurt Joe Biden's chances of winning re-election.
I think that there is the biggest reason why they're projecting, the Fed is projecting that they're going to be able to reduce interest rates by the end of 2024 down to about 4.5% from where it was at its high of 7 point something. And I think, I don't think they do think that they're ahead on, I don't think the money is the motivator. I don't think that inflation is the motivator. I think it's who's in charge and can we keep our side in charge? And so if we ease off of people a little of the pain right now, maybe they'll forget how bad Joe Biden did and maybe they'll re-elect him. And then on the other side, maybe then they'll go ahead and ratchet it down. I mean, Republicans and Democrats are both guilty of doing this. Hey, Nick's pointing at the timer, and neither of them let me say anything on this until it already hit 0. So I'm not listening to you.
Yeah. The counterpoint is that Tina got a whole free minute to herself before Hamilton started.
Yeah, she did. It started the clock. So, but just so you know, too, when Christian talks about it, I don't think it was ever actually below 10%. If you actually look at the old model of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, where they used to count inflation, if you use that model, which changed in the 80s, inflation actually is closer to around 10% right now, even though right now they're saying it's 3%. So that kind of shows you where there's a bit of a disconnect.
And people know it too.
Yeah.
You can't go to the grocery store and think they're actually telling
Don't
you
you
the
know
truth.
Paul Krugman said that we won the war on inflation at very little cost.
Yeah.
Who knew that rich
Well,
boomer who already got his
Yeah.
thinks that the economy's doing great?
Definitely at very little cost to Paul Krugman. All right, so here we go. We're gonna do a little bit international now. All right, ready? Okay. Will the war in Ukraine end in 2024, and how?
No, it will not end.
So Christian says no. So it's not even going to end. Do you think it's just going to stay in kind of perpetual stalemate?
It'll become a frozen conflict.
Frozen conflict. So we're looking like Korean Peninsula, right? It's
Korean
like we
Peninsula, or I mean, until last year, Armenia and Azerbaijan, that did end, unfortunately. Cyprus, right, between the breakaway Turkish state in the north and the Greek state to the south. You know, examples like that. Transnistria between Moldova and the
So
breakaway
you're
Russian
saying that
state.
basically the Russians kind of keep control of Donbass
I
region.
mean,
and
the fact that the Surovikin line couldn't have been broken, and it looked like that I remember in like August and September, it looked like the Surovikin line was going to be broken. The Surovikin line was the makeshift defensive line that the Russians had constructed from the Dnieper River all the way to basically the Donbass, to Donetsk and Luhansk. And so it was like running through the flat plains of the Zaporizhia Oblast. By the way, I can name more provinces in eastern Ukraine than Nikki Haley can. So it was running through the Zaporizhia Oblast. And if you know anything about history, that is like perfect ground for what we would call blitzkrieg or maneuver-style warfare.
Tank warfare.
I mean, that's where some of the largest tank battles in world history took place during World War II.
So what's gonna be the, this is you get the 3-minute version of this. Like
Okay.
what it's gonna be the.
So the reason I say all this is it looked like that the Ukrainians were going to break through, and they couldn't, even with Western tanks. They had like Leopards and M1 Abrams and British tanks, and they couldn't break through in the summer. And so, I mean, what that's telling me is that the Russians have innovated. They've changed their strategy to a one that works now.
Yeah.
And they're able to hold on to the land that they currently have. It would take years and way more casualties than we've currently seen. And there's already been like 500,000 casualties in this war for the Ukrainians to actually break through and reach the Sea of Azov. So my earlier optimism that the war could end last year, I think has changed dramatically. I think if it ends this year, it's not going to be through a military victory on the side of Ukraine or Russia for that matter. I think it's going to be through diplomacy. And ironically enough, it could actually come from the White House, because if Biden could actually get a peace deal with Putin and end that war, he could run on that in the general election and say, see, look, I brought peace to Europe. And now we don't need to spend another $100 billion on Ukraine.
Okay.
Now, I the last thing I'll say on that point is that, have you seen that, like, outlets like the New York Times and stuff like that are starting to run headlines saying things like, in order to win, Ukraine doesn't actually need to retake all their territory.
Yeah.
So if you look around, you can see that
get
the cathedral is starting to change their messaging on this. I think we're going to have a new current thing coming up, and that new current thing is going to be peace negotiations.
Yeah. So here's okay. I want to lay some groundwork from this. And Christian, who always will like tell it like it is. Okay. Initially, like in March, when this first kicked off, when the war first kicked off, I said that I didn't think the Russians had actually done a good enough job with their opening and offensive, and the end result was going to be that extended supply lines were going to lead to an insurgency operation within the back that was going to cause them problems. Christian, was I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I said what would happen after that is that you're going to see a reconsolidation of lines to where Russia could actually do a better job of maintaining their supply lines, and then as more Western aid came in, Ukraine was going to be able to make some advances and solidify their internal lines. So I said that. Then when Ukraine started their offensive, Christian, what did I say when the Ukraine started their offensive?
You and I argued on this briefly because I was more optimistic about the Ukrainians. And I remember Nick telling me, he's like, they're not going to be able to push here. They're going to take a lot of casualties and get very little ground for it. And you were right.
And the only reason
I was wrong.
Well, the only reason for that was everyone kept talking about, they're giving him the Leopards, they're giving him the Abrams, they're giving him all. I'm like, okay, here's the difference. It is one thing to hand a soldier a very sophisticated anti-tank weapon like a javelin and say, sit here and shoot tanks on a road, right? It is a very different thing to then hand them massive, expensive offensive capability for which they have had no real formal training on, and say, now conduct a massive coordinated combined arms offensive. Those are two very, very different things. The defense has an advantage with respect to you can do a lot more with an undertrained, undersupplied force, provided that you use them strategically and asymmetrically. When it comes to offense, that's a totally different game, and neither side has air superiority. And so I agree with Christian to the extent that this is going to be somewhat frozen. However, I actually think that how we define victory is going to change on this one, and the end result is going to be Russia has to be offered something to disengage. Ukraine has to be offered something. Both sides need to win in order to actually cease hostilities, because I don't think either side is happy with just a frozen border. So I'm going to predict what I predicted 6 months ago on Twitter and got screamed at by everybody. Ukraine is going to be offered a massive aid package, and I think they're probably going to give, and if what's his name? Zelensky agrees to it, I think he's going to be offered the Nobel Peace Prize. And like when I say a massive aid program, I mean like they're good. The West is going to rebuild Ukraine bigger and better, but that'll be the only thing that Biden builds back better will be Ukraine, right?
So I should invest in Ukrainian construction companies.
So I think what's going to end up happening is Russia is also going to get concessions, and here's what I see happening. Russia keeps the Crimea. There is a kind of an autonomous zone set up for the Donbass where they get to have some sort of elections in whatever future that'll be discussed at a later date. But Russia gets to be a part of that, like oversight of what that election looks like, along with like the UN or the NATO, not NATO, UN. They're also going to promise Russia that Ukraine does not join NATO because there's no reason for them to do that. And both sides are going to get to go back to their people and claim some sort of victory. So Donbass gets some sort of kind of like federalist approach to their own governance, which allows them to be a little bit more pro-Russian. Russia gets to claim that they saved the ethnically Russian people of the Donbass by their invasion. They get to keep Crimea. Ukraine gets to claim that they pushed Russia out of it. So Zelensky gets to say, I didn't lose any Ukrainian territory due to the Russian invasion. Plus, he's going to get to distribute hundreds of billions of dollars in aid money in order to help reassure his own reelection. And they're going to give him the Nobel Peace Prize and just make him the darling of Western Europe. I think that has the potential. I think that has the potential to happen in 2024, but I think it could just as easily happen in 2025.
If peace, the last thing I'll say is if peace happens, it will be because the U.S. decides to pivot diplomatically and broker peace talks with the Russians, probably for political reasons to shore up Joe Biden. If that doesn't happen, then no, I don't think the war ends this year.
Well, and again, I'm going to say this so the audience does not misunderstand me. I'm not saying I want this to happen or I want that to happen. I'm saying that based off of my analysis, what I understand about warfare, counterinsurgency, domestic U.S. politics, and things like that, I think that is the most likely and honestly probably the best outcome that you could hope for that actually stops hostilities. Otherwise, we do end up in some sort of situation where we just have people taking pot shots, over the lines for, a decade now. And I don't think either side really wants that in the end. I think both sides would like a way to extricate themselves from the situation. But Zelensky is, Zelensky's going to understand at some point that the moment the U.S. or whatnot says no more. And what he really has to worry about is that if Republicans win, if Trump wins, not only is it going to be no more, but it's not going to be, but here's a billion, or here's a $1 trillion, or not a trillion, but here's $100 billion aid package. So if Zelensky can get this deal to give Biden a win and give himself a win and get a ton of money for rebuilding Ukraine, that might be his best option. Putin also understands that, look, if Trump comes in and says, hey, we're going to have peace, that doesn't mean it works out all hunky-dory for Putin, because Trump's a lot more likely to say, Putin, you sign here or I bomb the living piss out of you. And Putin realizes at that point that if the U.S. gets on with respect to air power, Putin loses everything. So there is a clock going right now with respect to the U.S. election cycle. And if Putin and Zelensky don't understand that their best time to negotiate a deal is probably immediately, they could both be in trouble. Do you got anything on that one, babe?
Nope.
All right. So next one. Will China in 2024, will China invade Taiwan?
No.
Christian says no.
No.
Tina says no. I say no as well. I think everybody talking about, oh, China could invade Taiwan. We've talked about this before. There's actually a really
we did a whole episode on why it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's a really interesting interview as well where Sean Ryan was interviewing. I think it was former head of Blackwater. I just forgot his name. I can't believe that. But it was really interesting. He was talking about it as well, that like logistically it is a lot more difficult to invade Taiwan than people think it is. You got a bunch of talking heads on the news that just look at Excel spreadsheets and say, oh, well, China's got a lot more people. Okay. And have they ever conducted a complex amphibious operation over 100 miles of ocean that you only have about 2 months in which to strike against a force which then call up 2 million worth of reserves, not to mention have the full backing of the U.S. naval and air power? Okay, that's what makes doing that a whole lot harder than just saying, well, didn't we do it at Normandy?
Well, and not only that, but you kind of have to look at the trade-offs. Could they maybe do it if it was a long, grueling, horrible process? Possibly, but is it worth it to them? What do they gain in it?
Well,
it's worth it to them if they had a guarantee that they would succeed no matter how long or how many casualties it would take.
Eric Prince, thank you, Russell.
If Xi Jinping had a guarantee that he would win,
he wouldn't care about his casualties.
He would do it.
But there is no guarantee of that.
No,
there is no guarantee.
In fact, I would give them honestly right now, if China were to start the planning right now and conduct an invasion in, let's say, 8 months of Taiwan, and pick it when the weather's correct for the, I give them a less than 1% chance that they can actually pull it off. And in fact, I give them a less than 1% chance of them being able to pull off with no U.S. troops on the ground.
I think sometimes when people look at China versus Taiwan, I think they're looking at numbers against numbers, and that if Taiwan were to win, that would mean that China's wiped off the face of the earth. That's not the case. No. It means how far can they go, or how long can they hold out, and how many casualties can they inflict to where China decides that this is not a good idea.
So, Nick, I know that you skipped this one, but I really want to ask it because it's in the news.
Is this still about Taiwan? Or
No, it's moved because I think we're all in agreement.
All right, so we all agree China does not have the military power. The only and again,
there'll be a lot of saber rattling.
If people, there'll be a ton of saber rattling. The other thing too that people need to understand is that one of the reasons why Xi Jinping is actually looking for a conflict right now is when you have 30 million when you have 30 million more men than you do women in your country, India has just surpassed you with respect to population. Everybody's kind of, or I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people are kind of turning against China with respect to their manufacturing base because it's not the cheapest, it's not the best value for manufacturing anymore. He almost needs a conflict due to the old adage that war abroad is peace at home. And so there is massive instability that is, in fact, we didn't put that up there, but I honestly think 2024 is going to be the year that everybody finally acknowledges that China is not overtaking the United States and is actually in a really, really bad position.
I think that window is past. China is shrinking. Their population is falling for the first time
massively
since Mao slaughtered 100 million people, and the factories are pulling out. The Chinese economy is in a massive bubble. They're in a larger real estate bubble than we are, right? With the whole ghost cities thing and the Evergrande crisis,
inflation.
There's so many problems. The other side has problems too. That's a common saying, and I think it was one of our political mentors that actually was it who was it that said that the other side has problems too? It's Virginia guy.
Oh, I don't remember.
Was it Morton Blackwell?
I don't think so, but are you just talking about like just in general?
It's a campaign adage, right? When you're running for office, you have to remember the other side has problems.
Oh yeah, that is Blackwell.
Yeah, but it applies in geopolitics as well. Yeah, I knew it was Morton Blackwell. Yeah. I think that I think it's more likely that this year the general public starts to realize that window is passed and that China has many problems of their own than it is that China will conquer Taiwan.
Yeah.
Or even invade for that matter. The next question that I want to ask you is, how is the situation in Gaza and Israel going to end this year? Or is it going to end at all?
Well, Israel just announced that they killed, I think, one of the top leaders with respect to the planning and conduct of the October 7th massacre, which I think is a huge victory for them. Here's what I will say. I think a lot of things are at play right here. I do think Israel is very, very serious about just destroying Hamas's capability. I don't think they're going to allow Hamas to run Gaza in the future. I think that's over, and I don't think they're going to accept anything short of Hamas is no longer a thing. The problem is Hamas does have broad-based popular support in Gaza. It's not 100% of the Palestinian Arabs that live in Gaza, but they won an election. I mean, it was a plurality, I believe, but when they were interviewing people and doing polls on whether or not people supported Hamas, the answer was yes, and whether or not they supported the October 7th attacks, and the majority of the people in Gaza said yes. So this idea that Hamas is just operating with impunity regardless of what the people say, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So that actually creates the political situation after the fact to be far more complex. However, I do think there's been a lot of times where Israel's been kind of like talked down and said, all right, hey guys, it's time to accept some sort of settlement that you may not like, but it ends the hostilities. This one, there's two things about this I don't think people are understanding. One, biggest terrorist attack in Israeli history. It was the single largest loss of life by the Israelis in like a non-combat environment since the Holocaust. To put this in perspective, if you look at the number of casualties, civilian casualties that the Israelis sustained on October 7th, it would be the equivalent of a force coming over, let's say, the southern border in the United States, murdering 20 million people, kidnapping tens of thousands of them, and then going back down into Mexico. If that happened to us, look what we did.
If that happened to us, Mexico wouldn't exist anymore.
Look at what we did when two planes... Yeah. Look what we did when we had 4 planes hijacked. 3 of them crashed into their intended targets. We lost, I think, grand total, if you count everything, probably between around 4,000 people, and I'm counting people that died later and whatnot. We invaded 2 countries, completely overthrew their governors, and sustained wars for 2 decades in Afghanistan and 15 years in Iraq. So this idea that, we need a ceasefire right away because... I'm sorry, Israel right now is looking at this like, screw you. And the other thing that people don't seem to understand is who Hamas attacked. They didn't attack the headquarters of the Likud party, right, on October 7th. They attacked kibbutz. That's like the left. That's the most far left wing of like Israeli society. Kibbutz are essentially like communal farming areas. Now, I'm not saying they're like straight up communists, but a lot of them operate under very, very what we would call left-wing concepts of economics and equality. A lot of these organizations, a lot of these areas have been the ones that have been the most friendly toward a 2-state system, the most, attempting to be the most understanding of the Palestinian plight and whatnot. And guess what it afforded them on October 7th?
Death.
Nothing. Death, rape, murder, kidnap. So,
Can I dig down just a little bit on this one?
Yeah.
Okay. We have a different dynamic now, and that's what's really interesting is what this is doing to people around the world and in the U.S., because I'm seeing things I never thought I would see on our soil. People saying things, people rallying for Hamas. There are people on the side of Hamas here in our country. Typically, they're mostly on the left. And what's amazing to me is they're now coming out like you're talking about the Twin Towers coming down and what we did as a result of that as a response. But we have a different dynamic now. We've got people who got a hold of bin Laden's letter and started thinking that bin Laden had a good point. I guess we really had it coming. Yeah. And I mean, there's people completely denying the Holocaust now. You have pro-Hamas demonstrators out in front of the Holocaust Museum having demonstrations and then talking about, we don't really mean this against Israel. But then everything they say out of the other side of their mouth is anti-Israel and like gas the Jews again and things like that. I hope we don't get taken down for me saying that. They are saying things that are disgusting, and the whole academia, everything has primed our young people to think that this is that whole oppressor-oppressed thing. And if you could possibly be classified as an oppressor, then you have anything and absolutely everything coming to you. So, I mean, we even saw people talking about, would indigenous people in the U.S. have the right to go in and just murder people in their beds, children of, whatever, because of what happened to their people in the past? And they're saying, yes, yeah.
Well,
yeah, these people have it coming because they are from the oppressor class. And so this dynamic is insane. And so I kind of wonder what's going to happen in the U.S. as a result of this whole Israel conflict, because this has not just stayed there. This is all over the place, really concerning stuff.
I think it's fascinating that it only took about 2.5 decades of critical theory becoming one of the predominant ideologies within the humanities to take students from saying never again to
globalize the Intifada.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all it took. It took 2.5 decades. It took one generation. It took one generation of critical theory as the primary explanation of disparities within society to take a significant portion of our university, both from the educators and the student perspective at Ivy League schools in the United States. Again, to go from never again, I can't believe this ever happened, how is this possible, to, well, this decolonization is messy.
Oh yeah.
And it goes to what you were saying before with respect to the whole concept of when you divide the world into oppressor and oppressed, and then you put people into the oppressed category, all of a sudden whatever they do in order to escape oppression is justified. And then on top of that, whenever you ask them, well, wait a second, how do you develop these categories? And what constitutes these categories, and what's your evidence for those categories? Well, to them, that's just evidence that you haven't been woke yet into, what they're desperately trying to convince you of. And, and it's funny. I look at some of the comments on this stuff too, and people will come in and say, well, like, I'm not on Hamas's side. I'm not on Israel's side. I'm on America's side. Okay, great. I'm not saying the United States has a constitutional obligation to protect Israel. I'm not saying that. By the same token, I can look at Israel and I can look at Hamas, and I can make a pretty damn big distinction between those two things and certainly root for one side over the other. Like, this is not an either or proposition. I can be patriotic and believe the United States is way too involved in global conflicts, and at the same time look at a global conflict, recognize that we do not have a constitutional obligation to intervene, and at the same time think, gosh damn, I sure hope the people not murdering and raping little girls, I sure hope that's not the side that wins. I'm not quite done yet on this one, because I'm getting pissed. I'm getting pissed about this. I'm getting pissed about watching people that I genuinely respect and like within the political side not seem to be able to distinguish between two things. Two things can be true at once, right? It can be true that it is not the United States' responsibility to expend blood or treasure to defend Israel as a state. It can also be true that it would probably be much better for basic humanity if Hamas doesn't win. Can we come to that conclusion? Is that not America first anymore? What an absolute load of horse crap. Gosh damn, that pisses me off so bad. Look, there are plenty of things that the Israeli governments have done that I have not liked or not agreed with. Why? Because it's a government. There's plenty of things my government's done that I don't like or agree with. Holy crap. We dedicate about 70% of our podcast to that. But there's not a huge line of demarcation here when it comes to Hamas and Israel. Oh my gosh. Damn.
I remember saying right when we did our first episode, it was either our first or second episode after the October 7th attacks. And I said, ask yourself who you would rather be captured by, the IDF or Hamas. And, I think that the answer to that actually really, kind of sums up this whole conflict here. Look, I've been very critical of Israel, and you know this. We've had conversations. I remember you and I had a conversation like a few weeks before the attacks. We were talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I was bringing up how upset I was about Israel supplying weapons to the Azerbaijanis and their ongoing
totally agree.
War against Armenia. And from Israel's standpoint, there's a geopolitical reason to do it, because Azerbaijan hates Iran, and Iran hates Azerbaijan, even though they're both Islamic countries. And so it makes sense for them to cultivate relations with a neighbor with Iran. But from my standpoint, who is very pro-Armenian, That's the one Christian country left in the Middle East. And indirectly, Israel supplied a bunch of weapons to an Islamic State that is brutally subjugating those people. I had a huge issue with that. And I wish more people would bring it up. But I say this because none of that distracts from the fact that Hamas are a bunch of barbaric, murderous thugs who have an ideology that's basically a cult of death, that there's not a single value or principle that those people espouse that are Western values. There's not a single reason why anybody in the West should remotely support these people. And you can criticize the Israeli government all day long. You can criticize the actions of that government all day long. You can take whatever position you want on that. None of that distracts from the atrocities that Hamas perpetuated and openly says we will continue to perpetuate as long as we exist. We've done 2 podcasts on this immediately after the October 7th attacks. I recommend that anybody who hasn't gone and seen those, go back in our catalog and look for October 2023, and you will find them there. There's a lot of stuff that we talked about in those 2 episodes at a time when I think that what you're seeing, especially on the left, is this, quite honestly, the logical end result of an oppressor versus oppressed outlook on the world, and you're applying it now to Jewish people. You're not just applying it to white men now. You were applying it to us for a long time. And you know what? Hopefully, maybe, you'll see some pushback against this ideology now, because if you're Jewish in the United States, for a long time, you supported the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. For a long time, you actually supported funding many of these institutions that are pushing, especially within academia, right? There's a lot of Jewish donors for these places. Like Bill Ackman is one who went to Harvard. He was a huge donor of Harvard, and now he's calling for the resignation of the president of Harvard for refusing to condemn genocide, along with a bunch of other stuff. She's now a plagiarist as well. And so my hope is that some of these Jewish Americans that have a lot more influence within some of these institutions that are pushing this destructive ideology, maybe they'll finally wake up and realize it's not going to just stop with ridiculing white men and promoting them as the evil that's perpetuating, we need to decolonize America and we need to deconstruct whiteness. No, you are also now white in their eyes. You are also a man now in their eyes. You fall within that oppressor category within their eyes, and you're never going to get out of it. And so we need to, what we need to do is we need to decolonize the university of this destructive ideology and remove it from being perpetuated on impressionable students. And so hopefully if anything positive out of this conflict comes out of it, it will hopefully be the destruction of this terrible ideology. But you know what? I'm not going to be holding my breath for it, unfortunately, because we've seen how things have been going.
Well, and again, I see comments where it's like, but Israel is doing this totally unethically. All right, what's the ethical way to do this? What's the ethical way to root out a terrorist organization that regularly uses civilians as human shields, that regularly uses hospitals, mosques, and other areas that are generally protected by the Geneva Convention as their headquarters or storage? What's the ethical way to go in and do it? Because here's what I see. There's a lot of bombing, but ahead of that bombing, Israel said, evacuate this particular portion. And Hamas directly stood in the way of them being able to do that. And now they're still going door to door in order to conduct operations. What I see is a lot of people that have absolutely no idea how these operations are conducted, telling someone like me who does know how these operations are conducted because I've conducted them that, I can't believe they did this. Okay, well, do you want to learn why they did this or that? And again, I'm not saying that every military decision they made may have been a good one or that they couldn't have done something better. But I do find it fascinating the number of people with zero knowledge of how difficult it is to conduct these sorts of operations, sharing with us their grandiose wisdom on how it should be conducted and what would be better. And I'm looking at it going, you know what I know about this? I know that you have no idea how this is actually done. Look, the amount of effort the United States military, at least ground forces and others went to try to prevent civilian casualties. The thing is people always look at that and they will look at the civilian casualties and they'll laugh like, oh, that's a joke. What about this? What about that? Look, if you're talking about the firebombing of Dresden, if you're talking about dropping nukes on, I get it. There was tens of thousands of civilian casualties. If you talk about Iraq and Afghanistan, there was definitely a lot of civilian casualties. The thing is that what I want people to understand is that when you look at war, here's what you notice about all war conducted by all armies in every area of civilization across space and time, there's a lot of civilian casualties. The question is which militaries actually go out of their way and put their own troops in significant degrees of danger in order to try to mitigate those civilian casualties. And I will tell you right now, the United States military put us in greater danger in order to try to minimize civilian casualties. The IDF puts their own soldiers in significant danger in order to try to mitigate civilian casualties. Does that mean you eradicate all civilian casualties? No, it doesn't happen. It especially doesn't happen when you're fighting an enemy that is constantly putting their own civilians in harm's way on purpose, because it's the best way to manipulate people that will then show up and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe Israel, the IDF did this. Mm-hmm. So all I'm saying is, look, try to have a little appreciation for how difficult it is to actually do this, to actually conduct these operations, because it is not easy. All right, so we got another question here that we wanted to go into, and that had to do with...
Guess what just happened while we were speaking?
What?
The president of Harvard resigned.
Really?
Yay.
While we were speaking. This
my God.
This happened like 5 minutes ago.
So the president of Harvard, who had, I think, 50 different accusations of plagiarism against her, on top of not being able to condemn genocide against Jews before Congress. Now, keep in mind, this is the same Harvard president that if you misgendered someone, you were creating a hostile space and needed to face, extreme scrutiny, if not potential expulsion. But if you were advocating the open genocide of a people group based off of their ethnicity, well, they would have to check on whether or not that was a free speech issue. Not to mention the fact, like I said earlier, over 50 different accusations with respect to plagiarism. So she has just resigned. And I'm going to tell you right now, the best way to celebrate that is to go to Good Ranchers. That's right, because Good Ranchers right now, for a limited time in January, as an effort to kick off 2024 in the best way possible, is offering you more free stuff. So if you go to Good Ranchers and you sign up for one of their subscriptions, they're going to give you a year of free chicken with every single order. So they're going to give you 2 pounds of Good Ranchers chicken. I need you to understand something of a Good Ranchers chicken, all right? This isn't the sort of chicken that you just walk into any grocery store and buy, right? This is chicken that actually did get to go out there and live the sort of organic lifestyle you think it lived when it says organic on the side. Keep in mind that the rules for organic are actually pretty loose. Like, I think if you show a chicken a picture of a hill, that counts as organic now, and you only feed them certain feed. Okay, but if you actually want the sort of chicken that is living the sort of life where they get to go up there and scratch up bugs and get some protein in there along with the whatever kibble they're being fed, you want Good Ranchers chicken, because that is a chicken that has lived a full chicken life and now is just going to be more delicious as a result. This is guilt-free chicken, because when you eat this chicken, it didn't just survive some horrible existence, cooped up in a cage somewhere. This is a chicken that got to see the sunlight and eat some bugs. It enjoyed its time here, and now it's serving an even greater purpose of feeding you and your family, thanks to Good Ranchers. So use promo code Nick, go on goodranchers.com, promo code Nick, sign up for one of their subscriptions in January, and they're going to give you free chicken for the first year of that subscription on every order. This is like almost $200 off. Like, that's essentially what this is.
$189.
$189.
If you subscribe in January.
And with the inflation coming in 2024, that's like $1 million in savings. That's
I can't believe that you go into this and give backstories on these animals we're going to eat.
Oh, yeah. No, it's because they lived a good life. And animals that were treated well taste better.
I want to eat animals with
facts.
a backstory.
It's facts. So thank you very much, Good Rich. All right, as promised, we're gonna move into the last 30 minutes here of the episode. And now for these last 30 minutes, your questions, right? The things you wanted us to offer predictions on that we haven't offered predictions on because Nick went on a segue yelling about conducting counterterrorism operations in urban terrain. All right, which, look, it happens sometimes. I can't help it. I apologize. All right, so here we go. From Zim the Despot, we have, thank you very much for the super chat, removing someone from the ballots is a surefire way for said person to win. It worked for Lincoln, and I think it will work for Trump. Thank you very much, Zim. Yeah, that's the last time that there was a very, very active and successful attempt to remove a presidential candidate from the ballot was actually Lincoln, leading up to the election in 1860. And I want to say, I think 9 out of the 11.
He didn't even appear on the ballot in most southern states.
We all know how that ended.
I think it was in nine states. He did not even appear. And again, I say Confederate. This is before they left, right? Because the first state to leave was South Carolina on December 20th.
the election.
Yeah, it was December 20th in 1860 is when South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union. So I want you to imagine a bunch of states fully a part of the Union just removing a candidate from the ballot. That's actually what happened in the 1860 election cycle. So no, I think you're right. I think ultimately this is actually going to galvanize support. It's certainly going to galvanize support for Trump among his base, but it's also
not even going to hurt us in these blue states. We're not winning those states anyway. Our side's not winning some of these electoral college votes anyway. So they'll remove him from the ballot and he's still going to win. So have fun with that.
Maine actually matters though, because he could win one electoral. Theoretically, he could win the whole state. That's unlikely, but he very well could win the 2nd congressional district in northern Maine. He's won it. He's won it twice, so he's probably favored to win it again.
No, Maine makes more sense. I also think what's going to be interesting in some of these cases, you've written his name. I said this when the whole thing happened with the Supreme Court. I said, well, having your name on the ballot's not the only way to win an election.
Yeah.
And I had a bunch of people like, what are you talking about? Like, I want to write.
They don't realize that Nick won the biggest write-in campaign in Virginia history.
Yeah. So it can be done. Although in Colorado, they actually did it so that he couldn't even win a write-in.
Yeah, he can't even.
I don't know if that's true on Maine. We'll see what happens. But I think what will happen is that people will just simply write him. Like if they actually, if this holds out, which I think it's going to be challenged and probably stricken down. But if this holds out, I think people are just going to write it in. And then you're going to see legitimate. What all the left is doing right now is they're giving legitimacy to the claim that, okay, you're tired of rigging the elections in private, so now you're going to do it right out in the open, and you're going to legitimize in people's minds the idea that this election cycle is not legitimate. You took away my ability to vote for my candidate, so I'm not listening to you. Yeah. And the problem is that's not an illogical conclusion if you're going to do things like this.
We've got people who, like when we were talking about presidential predictions and things like that, people that were kind of mad that we didn't bring up RFK and Jr. and like Joe Manchin and those, and what's going to happen. Honestly, I don't think any of those guys are going to pull enough votes for it to matter. And I think RFK is not a conservative at all, but he will win some of the votes on the right. I think he'll get more votes from the right than he will from the left, just because there's plenty of people that hate Trump and will want that third way, even though RFK definitely does not align with us. He says a few things that people love, and people are so willing to fall all over themselves to become an RFK sycophant just because, he is pretty against vaccines and a few other things, but he's really, really not conservative, and he's not a libertarian. So none of that makes sense to me, but you know what? This is the world we live in.
Yeah. Kevin, thank you for the super chat. He goes, there are 800,000 houses in foreclosure or forbearance, most of which were the results of COVID era issues and programs, which have now ended. I can't see the rest of that question there.
One moment.
Thank you. This will come to a head. Yeah, I think it's interesting when we look at the way that the government has, and some of this is, some of this could be chalked up to certain things with banking practices, but a lot of that has to do with the way the government's manipulated the process. I saw a report once, and this was a while back. I'm not claiming this is the case now, but I saw a report a while back that there was actually, this was like, I think in the early 90s, that there was more vacant rooms in New York City than there were homeless people. The problem is that, for whatever reasons, they weren't fully constructed, or they needed to come up to better code, or they had fallen into disrepair. And when you looked at the reasons why that was happening, a lot of it had to do with government regulations, taxes, and other interventions, which didn't make it affordable for people to actually maintain those properties. And the end result is that you have a homeless crisis because you won't allow for new construction, or you've made it unprofitable to engage in new construction. And then every time the government has tried to step in and say, well, we'll take it over, they actually make things worse. And so I think you're right in the sense that it's not like we have a housing crisis that can't be solved. The problem is we have to ask, why aren't the people that are actually constructing homes, why aren't they able to do so at rates that would allow it to be more affordable? And almost every single one of those answers goes to some sort of government intervention, whether it's inflation, whether it's bad subsidization, whether it's regulations, whether it's, every one of those new good ideas that a politician passes increase the cost of something somewhere. And then you don't, when you buy your home, you're thinking, oh my gosh, why is it so expensive? Those evil builders or those evil banks. And, look, in one-off situations, that might be the case, but ultimately a bank wants to lend you money. Ultimately, a builder wants to build houses. This is how they make money. If they're not doing it, right, or it's becoming really expensive, the first question you should ask is, why is it so expensive? Because I'll guarantee you it's not that this is all not just getting eaten up in profits because everybody decided to be so greedy, right? Because if that was the case, if greed explained, if evil profiteering explained why there weren't enough housing or why things were so expensive, well, then all it would take is somebody to come in, enter the marketplace in a competitive fashion and undercut them. And we see that happening all over the place, either with competition or new technology. And yet we're not seeing it as much here. Why? Because the government has largely intervened and made competition very, very difficult.
Partly because a bunch of lobbyists were sent by builders associations and various things like that in order to bar entry into the market, to basically protect the big guys against smaller guys coming in and taking some of their market share.
My experience with my personal experience with a lot of the associations, though, they've been trying to look, we need it, every time you pass more regulations, every time you pass more proffer requirements, every time you do that, it causes the price to go up. Like that cost goes somewhere, and it's going to go into the end price of the house. And that's what I want people to understand is that, yes, generally what happens in industry is people fight regulations until they realize they can't win, and then they try to control the regulatory process.
Yeah.
Mark,
it's all done in the name of safety.
Yeah.
All of it, 100%. It's always in the name of safety.
Yeah. Mark asked the question, who will be the VP choice for Trump?
That's a great question.
I
know who I think.
All right. Who do you think, Tina?
Carrie Lake.
Okay. Tina thinks Carrie Lake.
I just hope it's not Nikki Haley.
I don't think it's going to be Nikki Haley. I honestly don't know. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be Nikki Haley, and I don't think it's going to be Carrie Lake.
I don't think it'll be Vivek because...
Oh, come on. Let's go.
I would love for it to be Vivek, to be completely honest.
I wouldn't.
I wish Trump would adopt much of his platform because Vivek is saying, I mean...
I like some of the stuff he says, but then there's
I really like
something... There is something there I can't trust.
There's a generational separation here. Everybody my age and younger, all for Vivek. Everyone 5-10 years older than I am, they think Vivek is untrustworthy.
I think part of the reason is because he's so articulate and he's able to say what a lot of people believe better than they themselves believe it. And so therefore, he must be a con artist is what a lot of these people are concluding. He must be.
I've seen him answer a few questions in a very, very slippery way. Some of his LGBTQ answers were weird. And also, I've
yet to hear a statement from him that I disagree with.
Yeah.
Same.
I tend to want to vote for somebody that has a similar worldview to me. I think he and I don't have the same worldview. We have some of the same political ideology, but our worldview is very different. And so I usually want to know somebody has a Christian worldview to vote for him. Not to say that I won't vote for somebody if there is no other option. It's just not going to be my first option.
I like Vivek. I think that I think that some of the concerns over Vivek, I think some of them are a little bit overblown. I don't think he's just a plan for the WEF. Like the same crap they could say about Javier Milei and stuff like that, which I think is just utterly ridiculous. But by the same token, I don't think he's earned complete trust yet.
No.
I think he does very, very good I think he does a very, very good job at talking off the cuff, engaging with crowds. I've been really impressed with his capability of doing that. His recall on the spot, I think is very impressive.
I think a lot of people just don't trust. They don't, because of everything that happened with COVID and all of the vaccine mumbo jumbo. Because of the way everything went down with that and the money sloshing through the system for COVID vaccines and all of that, and the fact that he made millions off of all of that.
Well,
I think people are going to, even if it was mainly like investments in biotech stuff, people are untrusting of basically people who made a lot of money off of something they found to be a huge problem.
I can understand that, but if you're also in the position to make money, then you just kind of do it, I think. But Andrea in the chat said that Vivek was a grifter. I don't think there's any bigger grifter on the Republican stage than Nikki Haley. She is the biggest, in my opinion, I totally agree with Hamilton. She is the biggest grifter out of all of them.
She lured Boeing to South Carolina with a bunch of subsidies, leaves the governorship, goes off and becomes, UN ambassador, leaves that, and then ends up, actually, no, sorry, before she does all that. And then after she leaves the governorship of South Carolina, she then ends up on their board. I mean, that is like textbook definition grifting right there. I'm going to lure with taxpayer money a company to relocate here, multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 company, and then I'm going to end up on their board after I'm done with my term as governor. And
yeah,
I get it. This has been a long question too with respect to. Here's part of the question on this, and I'm not playing devil's advocate because I think it's shady as hell, but I do want to ask this question. Most governors, I don't know a single governor that doesn't think that you use tax breaks and subsidies to entice businesses to come to your state. I don't know a single one. All of them think it works that way. The vast majority of my colleagues in the General Assembly think it works that way. So it's not as if this is some sort of weird political concept. If I were to go out there and ask most citizens, hey, if we have the opportunity to get a massive company to relocate and start a plan in this district and provide thousands of jobs, do you think we should give them some minor tax cuts up front? They'd probably say yes. So if a governor does that and everyone agrees, I'm not saying I agree, but everyone, the majority of the legislature, the majority of the voters all agree, this is a great idea. Thank you. Right? And then when you leave office, years later, that same company says, hey, do you want to be on the board? I mean, I'm just saying that is not as, it is easy to look back now and be like, that's totally nefarious. And again, it's nefarious to me because I don't believe in the subsidies and the manipulation of the tax code in the first place. Right. That's what I find the truly problematic part. I don't find the problematic part that as a representative or a governor, you advocated. So let's just say that she advocated for Boeing to come to South Carolina because, look, we got the lowest taxes, we got the best regulatory environment, we've got a good transportation system. You're going to have an educated workforce. This is going to be a so much better place. You're going to save, 3% on your overall, profits and whatnot by relocating here. And they did. And then 6 years later, they asked her to serve on the board. Would that be unethical? And the question is if the answer is yes, then what you're saying is that I want a governor that doesn't do any sort of, like, even if it's an ethical deal, right? No subsidization, no tax credits. I don't want an elected official to do any deal with any company that they might have interacted with as an elected official. If that's the case, all I'm going to point out is that you are making a different incentive structure now.
That's true.
And so
that's fair. That's a fair point. But the counter to that is that same person, Nikki Haley, is now going out there and saying things like, the attack on Israel on October 7th is an attack on America. And as Vivek pointed out on the debate stage, what Hamas did was evil and wrong and it needs to be called out, but you're failing a basic test of geography if you're going to say it's an attack on America.
True story.
Because if it's an attack on America, that necessitates a military response from America.
Yeah.
Nikki Haley is also a neoconservative.
That's the thing. Like, my major problem with Nikki Haley is not that she ended up on the board of Boeing, even though I have a real problem with the way that she enticed Boeing to come to South Carolina. My real problem with Nikki Haley is I fundamentally disagree with the way that she looks at foreign policy and the way that she looks at a lot of domestic policy. That's what disqualifies her for me.
We haven't done a good job getting the war hawks out of the party.
Well, and it's not, it's not even like the war hawks. Like, what I'm upset about, is I hate these terms.
Okay.
What I don't like is people that are constantly looking for the United States to be the world's police force. That's what I don't like. And Nikki Haley fits into that, and she has a financial incentive to fit into that. And that's what I think, that's where the ethics of this become problematic. All right, CVA Buck said, do you think we'll see the AI singularity in this year or soon after? And will it lead to a nation or company becoming unstoppable?
No, we're unfortunately not that far.
Unfortunately.
We're not. Well, I mean, so the concept of the singularity is interesting. Hamilton and I have had these conversations about things that are usually unrelated to the podcast.
I'm very familiar with AI technology, but I don't understand the singularity.
So the singularity is this idea. There's different interpretations of it, but one of the more common ones, because it's a buzzword. It's almost like the word neoliberal.
Sure.
People think that people have different interpretations of what that means. And usually for bad, it's usually a negative word that people throw out there to try to like, shut somebody down. Singularity is kind of a techno equivalent of that in the sense that people have different interpretations of what it means. But the traditional definition is that the singularity is this idea that there will come a point in time where technology has advanced so much that it basically becomes exponential. And it's almost like, technology and people merge. And people have different ideas of what that means, right? It could be everything from
Well, let's give like an Elon Musk example that he gives, because Elon Musk is actually one of the guys that I think does a good job of taking the very complex and technical aspect of this and putting it in terms people can understand. But it's the idea of, again, the human technology merging where you have a chip.
Yeah.
Right?
The Neuralink or something like
Neuralink, which allows
putting it in
you
people's heads.
a Neuralink, which allows you to imagine being able to Google things just in your head. Again, I think we're far away from that, but it's the idea that you would have just access to that sort of data by
the Matrix.
by essentially being plugged in.
I don't want to become the Borg though.
Yeah,
that's an older
Matrix.
reference.
But that's Buck's question, right?
Yeah.
Like because technology is increasing exponentially, like. An example I like to use is that it took, as far as we know, right, and taking out like hot air balloons, right, it took 10,000 years of human history to make an aircraft that would fly 60 seconds. But it only took about 60 years of history after that to make spacecraft.
For us to land on the moon.
Yeah.
The real question is, why did it take us 10,000 years to invent a hot air balloon or
Just
something
wait
like
till the chat lights up with people going, that was all done in a studio.
Nick, you clearly haven't watched enough History Channel after midnight, though, because don't you know that the aliens are there? Speaking of which, you could go back to our previous episode from the summer and watch our episode about aliens. So, my take on the singularity thing is we're way far off from something like that happening.
I don't know what way far off means. I don't think it's happening this year. All right, Posty Prue says, thank you for the super chat. Thank you very much. Being as how the cycle of nations is cyclical, can you foresee the history of the Crusades and Inquisitions being relived on a global scale? I certainly do. So for those of you who are wondering when they talk about like the cycles of nations, kind of like the easiest understanding of this would be the whole, good men create, good times create weak men create bad times create good. Like, but if you look at it, there's different people that have theories on the cycles of nations. Some of it has like 11 cycles, some of it has like 6 cycles, but it's this idea of you generally start, like a lot of them will start with, you have like tyranny, which leads to kind of like religious conviction and patriotic fervor, which leads to rebellion, which leads to the establishment of security, which leads to the establishment of widespread wealth and prosperity, which leads to greater decadence, which leads to a loss of moral value, which leads to tyranny, right? Like, this is a very rough, off the top of my head version of this, but Christian, correct me, that's fairly...
Yeah, What If Althist actually talks about this a lot in some of his videos, because he does a lot of history mixed with anthropology and sociology and
in fact, let me just do a quick plug for Rutyard real quick. We've done a couple interviews with Rutyard. We've been on his podcast, he's been on ours. He has a really interesting channel called What If Althist, and he does a lot about the cycles of countries and things like that, which I think he does some great videos, really good videos.
That interview that we did with Rutyard is one of the ones we'll be publishing in January/February.
That was a really fun conversation.
I wasn't able to listen to it when you were recording, so I'm actually really looking forward to listening to that episode when it goes out. To answer this question though, I actually do take the view that history is more cyclical in nature, not exactly cyclical. The famous Mark Twain, line that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that. And that's actually a break from the Western tradition. That's more popular in Eastern cultures than it is in Western cultures. The Western tradition is Whiggish history.
Yeah.
The idea that history is a straight line.
Yeah.
In fact, this is what the left actually firmly believes, that history is a straight line towards progress.
Yeah.
Everything's towards progress. And conservatives tend to be somewhat skeptical of that, but if you come from a Western tradition, you still have this idea that history is still a straight line. If you go to places like India or China or Korea or Japan, though, the opening line of The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, one of the most famous pieces of literature in Chinese history, is, "The empire long united must divide, long divided must unite."
Yeah.
And if you look at Chinese history, there's a reason they say that, because that is the history of China right there.
History, yeah.
And I actually think that history is more in that mold than it is in this Whiggish history view that is very popular in the West. And I think that a perfect example of this is actually look at wokeism today.
Yeah.
Look at leftism today. Leftism is a form of, it's a more atheistic one, or it's a more secular one, but it is a form of Puritanism. It is an inquisition in of itself in many respects. Unfortunately, it's an inquisition. It's a religion with no redemption.
Yeah.
It's original sin without a Christ Savior.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that there's absolutely some truth to be said there. Now, he used some examples like the Crusades and Inquisitions, but there's other examples that you can look at throughout history that I think are maybe more accurate, but it's in that same mold
like
of
the players change. The players change, but the stuff I would tend to. Here's my thought: is okay. See if this makes sense. I feel like history is a straight line with a pendulum going back and forth, and it makes a circle so basically you're going back and forth in a straight line. And the pendulum's creating the circle back and forth. So I don't necessarily think it's not a straight line, and I also don't think it's just a cycle. I think it's kind of a hybrid.
No, I actually think that makes a lot of sense because you do see that over time. So I think that's a great. You may have first of all, let's copyright that, and then. But I will say this: like in keeping with the theme of the show with predictions for 2024, I do think that cyclical nature of civilizations makes a lot of sense, along with what Tina said, with the idea that yes, things progress in a general direction, right? Technology tends to improve, and so however you can't have major falls, right? Like you can't have like the fall of the Roman Empire and then you actually have a hiatus with respect to a lot of technological advances for a period of time. I don't think we're at that stage yet. I think what we're kind of seeing, if we're looking for a historical aspect to this, is I think we're kind of somewhere in the late Roman Empire stage, or the late Roman Republic.
I think we're more in the late Roman Republic.
I think we're in the late Roman Republic stage, and the real question will be is are we at a point? I think in 2024 what you're going to see is a lot more division, and what I'm really waiting to see in 2024 is how people respond to that. Like, do people move? Do they vote with their feet? Or do they just yell about the circumstances wherever they're at? And I don't mean to be flippant. Like, I understand people fighting for, what they believe and trying to save their state or whatever it is. But I do think you're going to see a lot more ideologically driven moving, because we've already started to see a portion of it. I think that's only going to increase. But 2024, until the election happens, I can't really tell you what major stage I think we're at with respect to kind of the future of the country and whatnot. But I do think you're going to see a lot more divisiveness before you actually return to an element of greater unity. And in part, it's because when people always talk about why can't we focus on the things that unify us? Well, because in many respects, there's nothing that I can unify with when it comes. There's nothing really foundationally that I can unify with when it comes to critical theory. Or what we would call woke progressivism. Now, when it comes to like liberals, that if you're looking at like classical liberalism and you're looking at kind of the two trajectory where you've got like the conservative wing of classical liberalism and you've got the more liberal wing of classical liberalism, I can work with those people. I can live with those people. I can find compromise. I can find stuff like that. But with modern leftism, there's no, I can't. They don't want to coexist with me.
I don't want to share a country with those.
Yeah,
people.
and I think that's gonna come to a head in 2024 in various ways, regardless of who wins the election. I just don't know how it's going to manifest. All right, Happy Cappy said, "Thank you for the question. Question: if Trump is unable to be elected, will things go all bad for our country?" I don't think the key is necessarily Trump. In fact, that's one thing I'm a little bit concerned about with the right is the kind of the overdependence on Trump will save us. I certainly understand the appreciation for Trump. I certainly understand the appreciation for some of his policies. I'm going to tell you right now, when Trump ran in 2016, he was not my choice in the primary. I wanted Rand Paul. Because ultimately, I'm not looking for, I already got my savior. I'm not looking for one, and I'm sure as hell not looking for one in politics. Having said that, I think what they're doing to Trump right now is really dangerous, for the country as a whole. So if Trump gets on the ballot and doesn't get elected, I think there's going to be massive problems. If something else were to happen though, and Trump would not be the nominee, let's say Trump, he's old, right? Let's say something happened and oh my gosh, he had cancer and he died. Does that mean the country's going to hell? No. But I think Trump is not just a person. I think Trump's become a symbol of something. And that's part of what it is. But ultimately, I think what the right needs to understand and to include, and again, if Trump gets the nomination, I'm voting for him, right? I can't imagine a scenario where I'm not voting for Trump if he gets the nomination.
Right.
I mean, I guess if he came out and said, never mind, I want to confiscate your guns, I'd change my mind. But I don't anticipate that happening. But ultimately, if this isn't rooted in something deeper, like if what you believe in and what you're fighting for isn't rooted in something deeper than a political figure, that's really problematic and quite frankly, a little bit scary.
I think I'm going to address this too. I think temporarily things will get worse if the left wins basically this election cycle.
Yeah.
Then I do think things will get worse on multiple fronts. However, usually the party that's not in charge has the wind at their back, and the longer one party is in charge, the more disillusioned people become with that party. And I think that if the Democrats win the next presidential election, that they are going to face a crisis that the Democrat Party has not faced before, just because I think they're going to have such a high attrition rate, and you're going to have so many people becoming disillusioned with the Democratic Party that it will go our way after that.
Yeah.
Because I think we will continue down the track. Biden's taking us down. He's going to ban all these appliances. He's going to continue to do insanely ridiculous things to try to appease the most extreme elements of his party. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of people who usually make up that middle swath, and they're the ones that decide every single election. You've got this, 10 to 15% of people who swing back and forth, and I think they will lose tons of their swing voters, and they will lose people who used to religiously vote Democrat. I think they will start to lose those people too, and it's going to be a crisis for them to try to get them back. And that is my prediction if the left wins the presidential.
I got to call an audible here right now because someone in the chat, reminder, said, Nick, since you're all alive, I'll throw this out there. Found out my wife is going to be having a daughter and choosing a name. I chose a middle name of Tina, partly inspired by Mrs. Freitas.
Oh my gosh.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's
Congratulations. That's really cool.
No, thank you very much for telling us, Ramona. That's awesome. And congratulations. That's great. I'll tell you what, being a girl dad, man, you think you're a tough guy, and then you have a little girl and you find out what a sap you are.
Yep.
All right, we're going to go through some of these others a little bit faster because we know we're a little bit short of time. William McCorporal said, will Biden make it to November?
We already did that.
We already
one.
kind of talked about that one. I think most of us
Yes.
believe he will. Tina doesn't think. Tina thinks he might survive till November, but he won't be the nominee. Trevor asked the question, would you send your child to a military service academy? That's a good question. My son, Luke, is actually probably going to be enlisting next year. So the answer is that if they got into a military service academy, I would certainly be proud of them for achieving that. That's very difficult. I know, because I tried to get into West Point when I was in high school, and they looked at my math grades and they're like, "Oh, that's so sweet." but my one of my best friends did get in, and I got to give him his first salute when he graduated. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, I do think. Look, here's what it comes down to: is I still think there's value in serving in the military. I think there's value in going to a service academy. The real question is are your kids prepared to go into those environments and understand kind of the psychological aspect of it, the philosophical aspect of what's going on. I still believe those are institutions that are worth competing for, fighting for, and attempting to save. I don't think they're totally gone. I think there is a problem with respect to upper management and some of the bureaucratic management. But again, those are still institutions that I want to save. And again, I'll go back to this. My job as a parent is to prepare my child to go into the world and face it as it is, not how I wish it would be. And what I've said before is as your kids get older and they get to age appropriate stages where they've got to face challenges, I always say that I'm not going to prevent my child from going out there and getting bruises. I am going to try to prevent him from getting scars, right? I'm going to try to prevent him from doing anything that would, just be negatively impact their lives in some sort of drastic sense. But they've got to be able to go out and, the quote from Reagan is that, freedom isn't passed along in the bloodstream, that it needs to be protected, preserved, and then handed off to the next generation to do the same. And I think there's a lot that can be gained, both from not just a patriotic sense, but from a skill sense and a networking sense as well. And as much as I have a problem with U.S. foreign policy, as much as I have a problem with the current administration and some of the administrations I served under, I still don't regret my time in the military. So I hope that answers that question. Double Dub, thank you for the super chat. Your opinion on ranked voting is a method of beginning to undo this binary system that perpetuates extreme camps. Oh my gosh. So
it's become popular lately for Republicans to hate on ranked choice voting.
It is. I've actually carried legislation before on ranked choice voting, which is going to get some people to be furious with me because of how it's manifested in other states. The whole concept of ranked choice voting is that when you go to the polls, instead of just voting and saying, I want this candidate, what you would do is you would say, this candidate's my first choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice. If your first choice candidate falls off, then they will go and they will look at who your second choice was. The idea behind it is that it will achieve two things. One, it will give third parties the ability to actually be a little bit more competitive in these races because it's not just winner take all in the first ballot. The second component is that it would lead toward kind of kinder election cycles, because now you're not trying to just destroy your primary opponent. You're actually trying to build consensus within the electorate around a particular thing. The reason why a lot of Republicans absolutely hate this and think it's a threat is because it hasn't worked out well in the states that have actually done it, like Maine. And so, look, I don't know the answer to that one. I used to think it was a lot more.
Maine had jungle primaries.
Maine has some sort of ranked choice primary.
Maine has ranked choice voting.
Yeah. So
but that's not in a primary situation, and so that's
in the general.
It's in the general. Yeah.
Right.
So it would be interesting. I have since the way I've kind of evolved on this idea is I think conceptually there's some stuff that makes sense to it. If people can just sit around like the historical examples they have of, well, this happened in Maine and the Republican won and then they lost and it's because Democrats rigged it. Look, here's all I would ask. Look at it conceptually first and determine whether or not you think the idea has merit. And if it's no, that's fine. When I looked at it conceptually, I said, okay, I think there may be some merit to this. I've also seen some problems with it. I think that the best way to probably practice it is probably with internal party processes.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best part to practice it, in part because I think people get confused about how it actually works.
Yeah.
And if you're showing up to vote and you've never voted in ranked choice, if you've never voted in ranked choice before, and now all of a sudden you're doing it, it can be confusing, and I think it can lead to results that people might not have intended. So you want an informed electorate, and I've had people that I trust that I agree with on some things, disagree with on others, say, Nick, I see what you're trying to do and I appreciate it, but here's some of the problems. And they brought up good points. So I think that if you're going to do ranked choice stuff, it really should probably be something that's on the internal party process first, or maybe in what they call nonpartisan election cycles. So sometimes they do that with things like local townships or school boards or things like that. That might be a better way to do it so people fully understand what they're doing, because again, there's been situations where I think ranked choice voting has probably achieved its intended results, and I think there's been other times where it's created some problems. So I'm not put it this way, I am not advocating for ranked choice voting, but I do think it's something worth taking a look at. Okay, Robert Ball, will we ever stop sending money to Ukraine? Yeah, I think we're going to.
Not until the peace deal, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I think we'll continue to send money no matter what. But
actually,
will it be for this war? I don't know.
I think what's going to happen is
I got to correct myself, Nick. I said not until the peace deal. We'll be sending them money even after the peace deal.
The American. I think what's going to end up happening. This is just my prediction.
We send money to everybody.
It's not what I want to happen. It's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to get a peace deal on the backs of American taxpayers. And the argument they're going to make is, well, we'll spend far less money achieving the peace than we would through perpetual war, because nobody's going to consider, well, hey, what if we just didn't make this our taxpayers' responsibility? It's like politicians don't seem to grasp that as another option. So I think that's probably what's going to happen, is that American taxpayers are going to probably in some significant form finance the final peace deal that will come out of this. Again, not saying I like it. I'm just saying I think that's what will happen. Intensive Care Bear. By the way, we owe Andrea, Intensive Care Bear,
Thank you.
a thank you.
For the cookies.
She sent us some very delicious cookies, of which I ate a lot.
What? I just got back. Okay, I just got back last night
Sorry, dude.
from Florida.
Not my problem.
And this is the first I've heard about cookies, and you've eaten most of them?
I didn't say most. I said lots of them. She said a ton, dude.
Okay,
The
you're
good
gonna have to
news for
show me
you,
after
Christian, is there are more.
Yeah, there are more. We'll see who gets to the kitchen first after this podcast. All right, Intensive Quiver. So what are your predictions on those 90-day goals? Oh, she's calling me out. So we do a 90-day challenge within our community.
And we haven't
the
updated
90-day
anybody.
challenge ended in, I think, late November.
You know what your 90-day challenge is going to be?
What?
Stop the Democrats from passing terrible legislation in Richmond in the next 90 days.
No, she's got a good point. So on our community chat, we do we've talked about it on the podcast before. We do 90-day challenges where we talk about things that we're all going to work to improve, like spiritually, relationally, emotionally, physically, intellectually, financially, like all this stuff, right? And it just keeps everyone focused on things that you can actually control within your own life. And I will say that we did keep up on going to the gym. Christian has been faithfully going to the gym.
I took most of December off, though, because I was in the UK for the first half, and then I was in Florida for the second half. So I'll be planning on going back to the gym starting this week. So.
Yeah. I'm already getting ready for my planting season.
And Nick is stuck to the MMA.
homesteading. I have.
And that's been good
Hamilton's
for him. And
kind
it's
of
been good
stuck
for
to the
Luke.
MMA.
I've kind of stuck to it. I was out of town a lot
You were.
during December as well.
Yeah. One of my goals was I wanted to go fishing. Remember me saying
Yeah,
that?
and you
And I
didn't.
did not go fishing. But
She failed, Andrea.
but I did. Now, I never told everybody that this was part of what I wanted to do was to lose weight, but I have lost 20 pounds. So there is that.
She's getting ready for Mother of the Bride.
Yeah, I got a
I
long
must
way to
have
go.
taken
still.
on those 20 pounds then. Because
I still have
You
a
found
long way
them?
to go.
So, all right, but you're absolutely right, Andrew. We do need to do an update. I think we might actually try to do something like that inside the community chat this year.
Yeah.
Just for everyone those. But that is a good point, and you're right. We've been bad. I apologize. It's all my fault. I take full responsibility, but actually, I blame Christian. All right. So, Micah Raleigh asked. Sorry. Did you? Gosh, dang it! This technology. Mike Raleigh asked. I joined a little late, so forgive me if this has already been talked about. But do you think we will even have an election this year, considering what the Dems are trying
Yeah,
to do?
you're going to need to rewind it to the very beginning
Yeah,
because we totally went through
Bottom
this.
line is we all do think, yes, we're still going to have an election despite what Dems are doing. Payday asked, was Alex Jones right?
about many things,
We kind of joke. It was funny. Joe Rogan had a thing on this too, where it's like some of the crazy things Alex Jones has said is like, oh crap, there was actually an element of truth in that. So like, I don't think Alex Jones is right on everything, but I think he's been right on far more stuff than he's given
He
credit for.
exaggerates a lot of things.
Yeah,
and
he
has
does.
his own persona and stuff like that obviously turns me off. But
Yeah.
I joke with Nick all the time when the cameras aren't rolling, and I'm like, we need to have an Alex Jones was right jar.
Yeah.
And see how fast it fills up.
All right.
Yeah,
we
but
got to
if
do
we're
a-
not careful, people will like sue us for millions of dollars for
Oh,
various.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that-
true.
Yeah.
All right, Amy asks, what would y'all say to people who feel voting has come to that which is just the lesser of two evils? Amy, I would say that everybody has thought about that, about voting forever. Like there's very, very few election cycles in U.S. history where everyone was just like, oh my gosh, this is it.
I can't choose because I'm torn between two
They're
candidates I
so
both
great,
love.
right? Like that just doesn't happen very much in electoral politics. But what I would say is that, look, what I think for some people, it's a very, very genuine concern that neither party or any of the candidates really do a good job of representing their values. And the only thing I can say on that is that if you're expecting that to change just based off of how you vote, it's never going to change, because the people that are the most active within politics are the ones that generally get what they want out of politics. And my problem is this: I don't want politics to be the end-all be-all of what everybody gets or wants out of life. But I will say this, to the extent that you do have to be involved in politics, if you want to see more of what you're looking for, you're either going to have to work harder to foster or encourage that. And I don't mean like all the onus and responsibility is on you. But like Tina and Christian, these two right here, the whole reason I ran for office one time is like, well, Nick, you're complaining about stuff in a district that you could win and you just don't run. So at what point do you have a responsibility to go to the next level beyond voting, beyond volunteering, beyond doing all this other work and actually running yourself? And that was kind of the argument that convinced me to step up and do something. So that's all I would say is that if you want to see something different out of the candidates that are running, you're going to have to work specifically toward that purpose. And I think one of the best ways to do that long term is we also have to change the nature of the culture, because candidates reflect culture. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's why a lot of people are frustrated. Jay Solar 590, do we want Biden to be the nominee so we can beat him?
Yep.
Yeah.
We sure do. Because I am not sure of our chances against anybody else. Just because it's Biden, I think we can beat him.
Yeah. Former Wokey White says, what would happen if RFK Jr. wins?
He won't.
Well, okay, but what would happen if he did? And I would say that, honestly, you would get a very, very liberal administration, but you wouldn't get the same sort of censorship you saw, at least not being perpetuated from the top, and you wouldn't see as much collaboration with like big pharma and big tech.
RFK is an old school Democrat,
yeah,
like old school, like 1960s or 70s
yeah,
Democrat.
but he's still a big spend, big borrow, big welfare state, big government intervention. Like
I think
he would.
I do think that he would defend many of the Bill of Rights, though, and things like,
he's more of a liberal. When I talk about like the left version of classical liberalism and the right version of classical liberalism, I put him on the left version of classical liberalism. That's a guy I would not agree with on 70% of policy, but there would be areas where we would agree, and we would be operating from a similar worldview when it comes to what is a standard for like measuring truth. Like I don't think he's the sort of guy that would just throw out objective reality when it didn't suit his
He hasn't
purposes.
endorsed things like the government. In order to protect more democracy, we need to have government censorship of speech online.
Yeah. So. but overall, I'm telling you, anybody that's going to vote, and I think Rocky was talking about, he's going to vote for RFK to just, stand in the face of the two-party system. Like, okay, you're going to get a guy you don't like as chief executive if he wins, but I don't think he's going to. Catachrome said, do you think it will be actual violence or the guided tour if it's the right doing it? I will say this, if Trump were to win re-election, I think you would see massive violence from the left, because the left openly encourages, and I know people are going to get mad at me about this. Again, I didn't say liberals, I said the left. Mm-hmm. The left openly encourages violent protest.
Well, their leaders will say, fight them in the streets and things like that.
They let it go, and then the ones that don't sit by passively and don't say a whole lot when it's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Now, on the right, it depends on the nature of it. I do think you could see violence from the right. I don't think the right is beyond engaging in inappropriate acts of violence. I mean, that's a thing, and I think we should own up to that when it happens. But what I would say is that I think it's far less likely to happen, and I will say this, right-wing violent rioting I think is far less likely to manifest itself in things like looting or things like burning down small businesses.
The right doesn't loot. The right... I mean,
not
the right tends to be really focused on law and order, and so that's one of the reasons you don't see a bunch of looting.
I think what I was about to say? I was about to say the right doesn't loot. The right flies the army of Africa over the Strait of Gibraltar, and that was a Spanish reference.
Yeah. All right, so that's why I think you would still see. I think you would still see some like civil disobedience, but I think it would manifest itself very differently than the way it manifests itself.
However, the media would definitely make it out to be extremely violent.
No matter what happens, it would be, if the left does it, it's going to be a mostly peaceful protest, and if the right does it, it's going to be
deadly.
The worst insurrection since the Civil War. Roya Turow, prediction, it'll make Antifa and BLM reemerge if any Republican president wins.
What do you mean reemerge? They're still around.
Well, BLM has been neutered quite a bit by their own fiscal mismanagement. Antifa is still around and still doing stuff, but they will definitely, Antifa more, I think, and I think other organizations along that line will definitely reemerge. Daryl Fletcher, is the GOP making a movement to watch remote ballot boxes in response to the 2000 Mules documentary? In states where... In states where they actually have control of the legislature and a governor that'll sign laws, you're seeing a lot more push toward accountability with respect to the voting process. And states where it's either split or Democrat controlled, you're not. And that's how it works. So we had a ton of bills that we passed through the House of Delegates this last year trying to deal with voter integrity while still making it easy to vote legally, and all of them died in the Senate. So this is an ideological split with respect to how election processes should go. And go look at your state legislature and look who's in charge, and that'll tell you everything about what's going to actually pass. Caleb Reed said, question, regardless of national polls, who will win Iowa and New Hampshire specifically? I'm sick of hearing about national polls and we don't nominate, nor do we elect a president nationally. That's a good point. I think Trump wins Iowa, and I think Trump wins New Hampshire.
I don't think. Oh, you mean in the primaries?
Yeah.
Okay, because I was like, New Hampshire's probably voting blue in the general election, and Iowa's going to vote red in the general election. But
yeah.
I mean, I think Trump wins every state. So I mean, I think that
I'm having a hard time identifying.
You think Trump will win every state
in the
primaries?
Oh gosh, okay.
In the primaries,
I was confused for a second.
I don't know. There might be some. I'm trying to think of any scenario where a state might break for one of the other candidates, but I just don't think there's. Here's what it comes down to. Remember what you're talking about in a primary. You're talking about plurality. All right. So if Trump gets 38% of the vote among a field of 6 candidates and nobody else can break, 15, then that's a blowout and Trump wins. And I don't know another candidate. I can't think of a poll in a single state where Trump isn't leading the pack. So I think he wins in Iowa and New Hampshire. Again, I think Biden's the presumptive nominee unless something significant happens. Beaten to goo? Question for Nick. What is your plan when it goes bad? That's a great question.
We've done entire podcasts on
We've done some stuff on that. We will probably, well, no, actually we haven't. We've talked a lot about like what happens, but we haven't talked a whole lot about like, okay, what are my plans for it? But I think we're going to dedicate a whole episode to that rather than try to do it all right now. But one of the things that we focus a lot on this podcast is like, look, the goal should be to prevent things from going really, really bad. How do you do that? Well, it turns out that a lot of the things that you actually have control over in your life, you have relatively little control over who the president will be or the governor will be or even your state representative will be. But you have a lot of control over what you do with respect to your family, your own housing situation, growing food, raising animals. And it turns out a lot of these things have a bunch of other additional values apart from preparing for the apocalypse. So I would just say, focus on the things that you can control that just make sense, right? Improving yourself intellectually, improving yourself financially, whether it's just being more disciplined in your budgeting, making sure that you can actually do some things. We've had a lot of fun raising chickens and doing other things with the garden. I find it therapeutic, honestly. And it's a way to actually build resilience. And so I think a big part is build resilience by focusing on things that you can actually have some effect on and do that. And ultimately, I think that helps prevent things from going really bad. But if it ever does go really bad, well, you're in a much better position. So I'm an optimist overall, but that's what I'd say. Ventus Vindictus question, which economic bubble is going to pop first? We have a few areas where things look close to collapse. All right, Christian, take it away.
I think the bond market will go first.
All right, Christian says the bond market.
The bond market's way larger than the stock market, and we've talked about this with debt monetization. There's this term called bond vigilantes that basically force interest rates to go higher when they think that it deserves to go higher. And,
yeah.
I mean, the interest on the debt alone at 5% is eventually going to swamp this country, at least the federal government. And you're looking at China, Japan, major corporations, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. Most holders of federal treasuries are net sellers right now.
Yeah.
And so who's buying those treasuries?
So, and explain real quick for everyone what that means from a practical standpoint with government spending. And
practical standpoint is that in order to fund the federal government, more debt needs to be issued, not just to fund the federal government, but to fund the existing debt because we're constantly running a deficit, right? And so what happens over time is that eventually the amount of new debt that has to be issued just to pay for the old debt, let alone new spending or new programs or anything, just to pay for the interest will be so high that nobody will be, there physically won't be enough people in the bond market to buy up that debt without demanding higher interest rates. But higher interest rates demand more debt to pay for that higher interest. And so unless you balance the budget, inevitably, you have a buyer of last resort, and that buyer of last resort is the Federal Reserve itself. And when the Federal Reserve steps in to do it, you get debt monetization that will eventually lead to a debt crisis.
Yeah.
And
then you get a sovereign debt crisis where the value of the dollar it basically
this sounds like a whole episode.
Yeah, it's significantly. bottom line is what it leads to eventually is the federal government isn't allowed to pay all of it, or does not have the capability to pay all its bills. And then when it gets really bad, it doesn't have the capability of paying the people it uses to enforce its rules.
The end state is Argentina, is what I'm saying, right?
Well, at this point,
and
Javier Milei is actually doing some really good
when
things.
we did our right-wing backlash episode, maybe I'm wrong when I said that I think that we're going to end up with a Caesar. I think it's going to be the right that will go authoritarian, and wokeism will be crushed, but unfortunately it's not going to be crushed by classical liberals. It's going to be crushed by authoritarians.
Yeah.
For once, the left will be right when they say this is fascism.
Yeah.
But you know what? I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Because Milei is not a fascist.
No, not at all.
Even though they keep calling him one, name me a fascist that reduces government power and increases individual liberty.
This is
There's
I
no
think
such
people
thing.
just don't understand. I
But
think
Milei-
people
Milei
throw
is
these
the-
terms around and don't understand them.
I'll go a step further. Milei is the least fascist world leader in the Western Hemisphere. The least fascist, because fascists don't reduce government power or their control over the government. I'm telling you that every other world leader is technically more fascist. I'm not saying they're all fascist. I'm saying more fascist than Javier Milei. All right, we got to get through this because we only got a couple more minutes. All right. NAS, how concerned are you with terror attacks and illegal immigrants crossing the border this year?
Yeah, we didn't address that.
I've said this and I'll say it again. I don't think the biggest problem with the crisis on the southern border is actually rooted in terrorism. I think it's rooted in just overwhelming the system, overwhelming public services, overwhelming spending.
Well, a lot of people have a lot of concerns because when you see these people stopped, you'll see, all these military-aged men lined up who are not
refugees
from this hemisphere. Basically, they are from either the Middle East or China, and they're all lined up, but they're coming up through there.
I'll put it real simply. I actually think the overwhelming of the public systems is a bigger threat from that than it is with like the terrorist attacks. That doesn't mean I don't think potential terrorist attacks could be a significant threat. And obviously that is one of the threats that we need to address at the border. I just don't think it's not the top of the list. I would say it's like third for me. That's the best way I can do it. Freedom Seeker said, will world governments figure out that India is positioning its young population across the world in a long game land grab effort like the world has never seen before? I don't think that's something the Indian government is necessarily.
India's not
doing.
looking to like invade Bangladesh or anything. I mean, they're looking to consolidate control over Kashmir, but
no, I think they're talking about all over the world. So it's the idea that obviously so here's the deal. I don't think like that there's some grand plan within the Indian government to disperse its population in order to engage in a massive land grab. I think what's happening is it's the most populated country in the world. It has horrible grinding poverty. A lot of people that are capable of immigrating do immigrate and search for a better life. But I think China had a much more nationally focused strategy to try to, like, for instance, take African nations that were heavy in natural resources, put them into no-win debt situations in order to control those resources. I don't think the Indian government has a similar focus. I think a lot of people are just leaving India for countries that they think have better economic advantages. Now I could be wrong on that, but I don't see the same sort of centralized, global strategy out of India that I do in places like China. I think they'd be far more difficult to pull it off.
I do think India is going to take over entertainment because Bollywood is awesome. I watched RRR and I thought it was fantastic. I absolutely love the fact that Indian-made films will completely suspend everything we know about physics and reality and just let you live in a different world. And there's going to always be a dance-off and a dance fight of some sort. And they will throw motorcycles. They will throw tigers. I mean, it's amazing. I love it. And I loved the fact that that movie, RRR, was the most pro-gun movie I've ever seen in my life.
It kind of was.
Yes, I love it. Go watch it.
Robert Ball, can we stop paying taxes if they won't stop sending money to Ukraine? I mean, Robert, you can stop paying taxes right now. They're just going to arrest you. Like, that's what it comes down to. House of Random question, will the U.S. ever stop being the world police and help our own? We will if we have a sovereign debt crisis because we won't be able to pay soldiers. Not to mention the fact that we have a massive recruiting crisis within the United States right now because, quite frankly, who wants to join a military that seems more focused on transgender inclusion than it does actually fighting, and being fighting force. Sir Grog asks, question, one thing you left out about the Ukraine-Russian war is the possibility of nuclear weapons, especially if the U.S. gets involved. Comments? I don't think, look, here's what it comes down to nuclear weapons. I think it only makes sense for most people. Like if you're a mullah somewhere that believes that this is the only way we're going to get, whatever, Allah to return, then yeah, you might use a nuclear weapon for things that don't necessarily make sense. But if you're Putin, I just don't think you're using nukes. The only way Putin's going to use nukes if he got to the point where he thought his regime was absolutely threatened with like a massive Western invasion of the Russian homeland. And I don't think that's going to happen. Ukraine doesn't have the capability to pull that off, especially not without massive Western support. And so I just don't think it's going to go nuclear over there. I think Putin did that because it worked as a way to remind everyone that it was an option. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, there is an escalation for which nobody will be happy. But ultimately, I think it ends with, again, U.S. taxpayers funding the peace. And part of that piece is going to have to be bought at the expense of, and again, I'm not saying I like this. I'm not saying I want it to go this way. I'm saying what I think will happen. Zelensky's going to get offered a major deal to walk back some of his things. Like, we're taking back all of our territory to include Ukraine, to include Crimea. I think Putin is going to get concessions when it comes to supplying Western Europe with energy again, because quite frankly, it's just too damn expensive. And it turns out that, basing your energy policy on a pissed off 16-year-old Swedish girl, I guess she's 20 now, was not good policy. And so what Russia's going to get is a large infusion of cash, not in the form of direct subsidization, but in the form of, once again, them being able to supply Western Europe with energy. Roya Turo, will China choose another target that's easier than Taiwan? They're bullying the Philippines right now.
The Spratly Islands have always been a point of contention, but the reason that China is picking a target in Taiwan is because they have a territorial claim over the island that stretches back hundreds of years. Regardless of the regime in Beijing right now, Taiwan has been a part of China on and off for centuries, right? Like, they lost control of it to the Japanese in the first Sino-Japanese War, but then they got it back after World War II. And so, like, from the Communist Party's perspective, this is rightful Chinese territory. Yeah. Whereas, like, Laos is not rightful Chinese territory.
They have a casus belli, right? A cause for war. Here's the deal. If you look at this on kind of like a moral framework or even an international relations framework, people always try to come up with a reason why they're not the aggressor, right? That is a kind of a common theme now. And what's amazing, even if you go back to ancient Rome, when Rome was like, obviously the aggressor, they were constantly looking for reasons to justify what they were doing as, no, we're not their aggressor, but if we don't attack them right now, they're going to attack us. Don't you remember that thing? So China has a much easier casus belli with Taiwan than they do with something like the Spratlys or with the Philippines or with Laos or Vietnam. But ultimately, I do think that they will try to bully somebody. I just don't know how it's going to manifest. It could manifest itself in parts of like Mongolia. It could manifest itself in parts of, it could manifest itself with respect to India. It can manifest itself with the Spratly Islands. I don't think they're going to do anything too outrageous against the country that would require them to launch a major amphibious operation in some way that is perceived to be a very, very strong U.S. ally. So read into that what you will. I think it'll probably be, they'd be more likely to, pick a limited fight with a border country for which they don't have to deal with the same logistical issues. But yeah. And then final question here from Snake. Question for Nick. I've been watching your shorts and it's clear that you're based in Christianity. Would you say that there are people who would disagree with you purely due to that fact? Maybe some people, but we actually have a lot of people that watch. I mean, Rocky's one of the guys on here that watches very regularly and contributes a lot. Who makes no makes no bones about the fact that he is very hardcore atheist. I mean, look, I always tell people that I appreciate anybody that's willing to sit down and give us an audience and watch, and I hope that they actually get something out of it. But I'm never going to shy away from the fact that I am a Christian, and that's the foundation of my worldview. The way I explained it to somebody once before was I said, look, we can talk about the ideas all day long, but I'm not going to ignore the author of those ideas or the person I believe to be the author of those ideas, because that's fundamental to why I believe they're true and part of why I think they work well with objective reality, objective morality, and objective truth. And so I'm sure that there are some people that might just instantly disregard. But I will say this, we are actually planning a long requested episode that we're going to do probably here in the next month or so, maybe 2 months, where we're going to talk about the idea is Christianity reasonable? And the whole purpose of that episode is actually not going to be, it's not going to be necessarily an evangelical or proselytizing focused episode. It's going to be more about trying to address the questions of is it reasonable for a logic, rational person that believes in freedom of inquiry and scientific discovery to actually have a genuine commitment to Christianity? And we're going to address that by actually, doing a steelman argument with all of the arguments against Christianity and some of those philosophical questions, some of those scientific questions. But really what the goal of that episode is going to be is not to say, okay, we've made some comprehensive argument for everything, but it's going to be, I hope, to dispel this myth that me believing in that, and the example I gave to Tina was, we do have some people listen to us like, yeah, I really like Nick on politics, and I really like Nick on what it means to be a man, and I really like Nick on what it means to raise sons or raise daughters. But on this one issue, he's kind of the crazy uncle. And what I want to at least demonstrate is that if I can't convince you to believe what I believe, I at least want to be able to demonstrate that this is not my crazy uncle side. Me believing in this is not something that you make an allowance for because I like Nick on all these other things, I'm willing to put up with this and just assume that on this, he just really hasn't thought about it enough. The whole point of the episode is going to be like, no, I've thought about it quite a bit. It's the thing I've thought the most about. And I do believe it's true. And these are the reasons why. And if you're going to say, okay, Nick, I don't agree with you, you can say that, but my goal is for you to walk away from that going, I might not agree with Nick on this, but this isn't the crazy uncle aspect of his personality. Like, he really has thought about it, and he has at least made the argument for why it is reasonable to believe this. So that, again, that's an episode that we've actually had requested in our community for a while now, and I think we're going to look at it from that perspective. Not Christianity is just like the noble myth or a noble set of values or whatnot, or a nice story about a good man, but actually talk about like, no, this is what it says, and this is why it's reasonable to believe it. And you can choose not to, right? We're not going to kick you off and not answer your questions anymore or whatnot if you choose not to, but to at least come to the conclusion that, okay, that's reasonable. All right. Well, listen, we've gone way over what we said we were going to do, but whenever we get questions, we really try to be diligent in answering all those questions. And if you like this, where we said, hey, look, we're going to talk about this for a good hour, 15 minutes, and then we're going to jump into questions so that we can really get to some of the things that you wanted to hear us talk about on this topic that maybe we didn't get a chance to. If you like that, let us know. Like, join the community chat and say, hey, follow this episode. Really like the fact that you dedicated a whole portion of the episode to just answering questions, because if you like that structure, we will start including it. But we got to hear from you. So be sure to go to Circle. Also, once again, you know what time it is. It's time for you to order meat. So I want you to go to goodranchers.com. I want you to use promo code Nick. I want you to sign up for one of those subscriptions, because in January, this deal is working right now through January. In January, you sign up for one of those subscriptions, they're going to send you free chicken. And dude, I am telling you, this chicken is really, really good. Like, I've had it. And it is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. So
speaking of subscriptions, please like and subscribe. You never ask people to like and subscribe for us.
That's on purpose.
Why is that?
Because if they want to see more of it, they'll subscribe.
All right, I guess.
If we do a good enough job.
I guess so.
We'll give the pitch that Dream usually gives in his Minecraft playthroughs. And I don't even really like the guy, but he is a good content creator, even though I don't necessarily like the guy. And what he says is, if you liked the content, most of you watching probably aren't subscribed. It takes like 2 seconds to like it, and if you change your mind, you can always unsubscribe. It costs you nothing.
I like Nerdrotic's closeout. He always goes, if you liked what you watched, like and subscribe. If you didn't like what you saw,
for watching.
If you didn't like what you saw, thanks for hanging with us for the whole, whatever it was. But once again, thank you very much. And if I can leave you with anything, I will leave you with this. I'm excited about 2024. I really am. Not because I don't think that there's going to be a lot of challenges, not because I don't think there's going to be stuff happens that I wish wouldn't have happened, but I'm really going into this year focused on, there's the things I can't control. There's the things I might be able to have an effect on, right? And then there's the things I have a lot of control over in my life. And as I look at things, as I get ready to plan out what I'm going to put in my garden this year, as I look at the things that I'm going to be doing with my kids, as I look at the fact that my oldest daughter is getting married to a great guy, as I look at all of these things, I'm like, you know what? That's where the main focus is going. It's going on the things that I have the most control over and that I can have the biggest impact on. It doesn't mean I'm going to ignore the other things that I have less of an impact on. I'm still going to fight those battles. But I'm not going to let them dominate my attention. I'm going to keep the attention focused on the things that God's put in front of me, that God's given me more responsibility over. Because here's what I've noticed. When I focus more on those things, I do a better job on the other things. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. 2024 is going to be great. Not in every aspect. And I'm not just saying this as some sort of like blam optimistic, like it's all about how you think about things. No, some things just suck, right? And we're going to have to go through them. But the more we're focused on actually preparing ourselves by just doing the things that make sense to do, whether it's good times or bad, I think we make the better times better. And I think we're able to help navigate other people through the bad times more effectively. So that's the mission for 2024. We're glad you're here with us, and we look forward to seeing you next episode.